when it's heard.
Thank you.
Motion to continue items 1, 2, 7A and B, and 16 to the date specified.
Okay. We have a motion from Commissioner Koppel and a second from Commissioner Johnson. We'll take roll. Vice President Melgar?
Aye.
Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore? And Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
Great. That item passes. Okay. Item number 2 on your calendar, I should say number 3 on your calendar, Commissioner comments and questions.
Commissioner Richards.
Two things. First, I don't know if anybody recalls 2 on Roosevelt Way. It was a Section 317 demo, tantamount to demolition in my neighborhood, and we as a commission had asked, we approved the tantamount to demolition provided that they add an additional unit on site. So I got a card in the mail that it's actually being sold now, so pat on our back to the commission for getting an additional unit in my neighborhood. I didn't want to tell you what the price is because I probably can't afford it. And interestingly, on the way here, I grabbed a copy of the SF Weekly. Peter Lawrence Kane wrote an article that I have yet to finish because I was actually too depressed to finish reading it, called Busted, The Horrors of the Recession to Come. And actually, this morning I thought, it's been a while since our economist Ted Egan's come and given us a briefing on where he thinks the city is going. So I'd love to ask the President and VP to consider having Mr. Egan come again and let us know about the state of the economy in San Francisco. So anyway, it's an interesting article if you want to read it.
Thank you, Commissioner Richards. Commissioner Moore.
I had the opportunity to meet with a representative of the German government the other day, and this was on behalf of planning, a person asking about our experiences with Alice Act evictions, affordable units, etc. And one of the questions that came up in the discussion was the issue of units staying vacant. And I reported to him that unfortunately we have a large number of units that are vacant, but however we have not yet been able to formulate laws by which we can really establish a position of what we should do with this large resource of vacant units. And what he actually described to me as an interesting example for what's happening in Germany, where there is a similar situation with evictions and affordable housing, etc., is when it comes to vacant units, they have a position that a unit that stays vacant longer than 3 months is basically a change in use designation. And after 3 months, as it has changed use from occupied to empty, it is basically fine to the extent that it's a serious detriment to wanting to pursue that path. I just pass that on. This particular gentleman promised me to send me the legislation when he returns back to Germany, which will be in a month or so, and I will be very interested to share that information with whoever is interested.
Thank you. Sorry, Rich, I'm having technical difficulties. The screen that I have doesn't enable me to acknowledge speakers. It's not the chair's screen, so I'm not really sure what to do about that, except just do it by contact. So
maybe once we speak, we can cancel to speak.
yes. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Let's speak again.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Just one more thing.
Yes, Commissioner Richards.
Okay, just one more thing. To Commissioner Moore's point, I think that's something that the housing affordability strategy could consider in their toolbox to actually be able to deal with vacant units. One other thing I forgot to mention, I had the pleasure, and I say that very, very emphatically, of sitting down with Adi Negaraj, who's the new Spur San Francisco person. He took over for former Commissioner Christine Johnson. Refreshing discussion around San Francisco, where it's going, his views around displacement and densification and urban design, and any other commissioners, I would encourage you to sit down with him. He reached out to me. I thought that was a great gesture and had a fantastic conversation with him. So I look forward to working with him on things to come.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, Commissioners, we'll move on to Director's announcements.
No new announcements today, Commissioners. Thank you.
Okay. Item 5, review of past events at the Board of Supervisors, Board of Appeals, and Historic Preservation Commission.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. On the land use agenda this week, the committee considered Supervisor Tang and Safai's ordinance to exempt certain retail uses from neighborhood notification in Supervisors District 4 and 11. Commissioners, you heard this item on July 12th and voted unanimously to support the ordinance with modifications. Those modifications include allowing arts activity uses in the named neighbor commercial districts within District 4, principally permit some institutional uses within the Excelsior Outer Mission Street NCD, include a reporting requirement to track the impacts of this ordinance and reconcile this ordinance with the streamlining ordinance. At the hearing, there was no public comment. Supervisor Tang and Safai spoke of the need to attract new retail activity to their districts and how this ordinance would accomplish that. The committee accepted all of the Commission's modifications except the one that would permit some institutional uses as of right in the Excelsior Outer Mission Street NCT. The committee then voted to continue the item for 1 week due to the amendments. Next on the agenda was Supervisor Safai's ordinance that would allow catering as an accessory use to limited restaurants. Commissioners, you heard this item on June 21st and recommended approval with modifications. The modification was to make the new accessory provisions apply citywide. At the land use hearing, there was one speaker on the item who spoke in favor. Supervisor Safai then made a motion to amend the ordinance to include the Planning Commission's recommendation. He then made a motion to continue that item for 1 week due to the amendment. Both of those passed unanimously. Next on the agenda, the committee considered the landmark designation of the Arthur H. Coleman Medical Center located at 6301 3rd Street. The building is significant for its association with Dr. Arthur H. Coleman, a nationally prominent African-American lawyer and physician, as well as influential healthcare and civil rights advocate. Dr. Coleman was celebrated as a local pioneer in the nationally significant community health center movement that began in the 1960s. He worked tirelessly to achieve racial equity and within the healthcare system and the medical profession, and advocated for the needs of the Bayview's African-American community. At the hearing, Patricia Coleman, the daughter of Dr. Coleman, Dr. Arliss Walker of True Hope Church of God, staff members of the Bayview Hunters Point Clinic, and members of the Small Business Commission all spoke in favor of the designation. After public comment, the committee voted to move the nomination forward with a positive recommendation. Next, the committee considered the ordinance sponsored by Supervisor Peskin to prohibit medical cannabis dispensaries in the 3 Chinatown mixed-use districts. Commissioners, you heard this item on June 14th and voted to disapprove the ordinance. There was no public comment at the hearing, and after some remarks by Supervisor Peskin about the need for the ordinance, the committee voted to move the item to the full board with a positive recommendation. Last on the agenda was the suite of ordinance for the Central Soma Plan. During the hearing, there were about 25 public commenters. The scope of the comments included support for strengthening the good jobs provision of the plan through trailing legislation, requests for additional exceptions for key sites, possible amendments to the use it or lose it progress requirements in the Housing Sustainability District, calls for more anti-displacement policies and funding, and support to allow the proposed hotel at 816 Folsom Street to proceed under the previously proposed MUO zoning. Supervisor Kim introduced 48 amendments and declared her intent to add on additional amendments at next week's land use hearing on July 23rd. This will be followed by a referral back to the Planning Commission to evaluate the substantive amendments. A few highlights from the amendments include modifying zoning on some parcels to limit hotel commercial development while allowing housing, crafting zoning exceptions to key individual sites, allowing other lower rent uses to occupy PDR replacement spaces such as community facilities, and adding language to enact the Mello-Roos tax. This item will come back to you in the coming weeks, so you'll have an opportunity to review all the amendments that to date. At the full board this week, the zoning map for parcels on Burnett Avenue that are being sought pursuant to a legal agreement sponsored by Supervisor Mandelman was continued to July 31st. The Planning Code amendment for the Enforcement Fund was continued to July 24th. And next was the ordinance that would amend the accessory dwelling unit program sponsored by Supervisor Tang. At the full board, Supervisor Tang introduced a few additional amendments, which included requiring a pre-application meeting with adjacent neighbors when filing under cantilevered rooms and decks in the required rear yard, requiring notification for dormers on freestanding structures if the property is within an Article 10 or 11 district. ADU expansions within the buildable envelope cannot exceed the existing building height. And finally, the removal of the cap on the number of units that can be legalized per lot was taken out of the ordinance. As a result, only 1 unit per lot continues to be eligible for the legalization program. With these amendments, the ordinance unanimously passed its first read at the board. Next on the agenda was Home SF 2.0, which creates a 3-tiered program for Home SF that lasts until December 31st, 2019. At the board meeting, Supervisor Tang announced that she would introduce a new amendment to include a 36-month use it or lose it provision as recommended by the Planning Commission and several advocates. The amendment states that entitlements granted by the Planning Commission for a Home SF project would expire after 36 months unless the project sponsor has pulled a building or site permit. The motion to incorporate the amendments passed unanimously 11-0. The amended legislation then unanimously passed its first read. And then finally, the board continued the Central Soma Plan EIR appeal to September 4th of this year. And that's all I have for you today.
Thank you.
Commissioners, on behalf of the zoning administrator, there was one item that he asked me to report to you on. That item that was considered last night was at the notice of violation and penalty for 660 3rd Street. You heard this request to legalize office use back in 2014. At that time, the commission allowed legalization of 2 of the 4 stories of the building as office. The decision was not appealed at that time, so the department subsequently pursued enforcement action on the remaining office uses in the building. In 2016, the Board of Appeals first heard the appeal of the NOV and ultimately continued the item in part to see how the Central Soma Plan may impact legalization of the office uses. In that period, the planning department and property owner reached an agreement whereby the owner will bring the property into compliance by September of 2019, and penalties will accrue at $150 a day from the date of the board's decision until the building is brought into compliance. If the building is not brought into compliance by that time, the penalties will increase to $250 a day. So the board unanimously upheld the NOV based on the terms of that agreement. That concludes my report. Thanks.
And then, Commissioners, finally, the Historic Preservation Commission did meet yesterday. They held a joint hearing with the Arts Commission, the first time that they've done this, and it was specifically to review the J.C. Ducot toilets that they're basically rolling out new designs basically for throughout the city. The HPC was specifically looking at the toilets that would be placed within the landmark districts, as well as the Arts Commission, while looking at the whole program holistically. So,
Thank you.
okay, so Commissioners, we'll move on to general public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded the item when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes, and I have 1 speaker card.
Okay, we have a speaker card for Georgia Shudish, but anyone else who wants to speak, please line up by the wall on my left. Ms. Clark.
Georgia asked me to go first, so. Laura Clark, YIMBY Action. So one of the things that wasn't announced during the summary about activities at the board is that ADUs and new construction was talked about but not included in this legislation. And you are the body that has seen the most opportunity for ADUs in new construction. You have seen large single-family homes that you have noted repeatedly could benefit from an ADU. You have struggled to figure out how to wedge the opportunity for an ADU to be like after they build it, then put it in and sort of get around that prohibition. And I would recommend to you that you pursue actually leading the charge on crafting the legislation that would create ADUs in new construction. It may be that it will come as trailing legislation from the board, but since you have the most firsthand experience of the desire to get, that 2-unit to a 3-unit to a 4-unit, for not wanting to see mega houses, but instead wanting to see a couple single apartments, you have the opportunity to really get it right. If there are concerns about incentivizing tear downs, if that's a thing that you guys want to really care about, you can figure out how to make sure that the legislation takes that into account. If you want to make sure that we aren't incentivizing evicting people from single-family homes that don't have rent control, which I think is a very valid concern, you can figure out how to craft an ADU and new construction policy that makes sure to take that into account. You have seen an example of basically everything firsthand. It has come through here, and you have the ability to direct the planning department to craft the perfect legislation that can get us as many ADUs in new construction as possible. It will have the added benefit of bringing us into compliance with state law, because I would prefer for us not to do this via lawsuit. I would prefer for us to do this via well-crafted legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Is the clock going to reset or? Yep. Hey, good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is James Still. I'm a District 6 resident. Last week, I was here to speak in favor of development, talked about some of the good things it can bring. This week, I'm going to change my tone a little bit and talk about some of the bad things that development can bring when it's proposed. So a lot of times when development is proposed, residents come up, and usually the architecture is contemporary, and they say, you know, it's ruining the fabric of San Francisco. This is really jarring compared to the traditional architecture that we do have. And so I wanted to read some actual quotes. These were from projects that not only the city approved, but we actually went on to build, and what people had to say about them. Project number 1, they said it was financially unsound, legally dubious, an aesthetic blight, and an engineering hazard, end quote. Project number 2, the most horrendously and portentously bad building in the city, end quote, quote, hideous nonsense. Project number 3, a metallic snout in the heart of San Francisco, end quote, quote, a big shrine to the mass media. Project number 4, surprisingly standoffish, end quote, quote, more an intimidating fortress than an enticing people's palace. And finally, Project 5, everything that is loud is in fashion. If the upper stories are not of red or blue, they are painted up into uncouth panels of yellow and brown. In this city, we approved all 5. We built all 5. We're stuck with them for the next 100 years or more. Those projects are the Golden Gate Bridge, Transamerica Pyramid, Sutro Tower, Mario Boda's facade for the SF MoMA, and the Painted Ladies. And obviously, these have gone on, despite being jarring at the time, to become iconic icons of our city that people travel all across the world to come and see. You know, recently I saw Ant-Man 2, filmed and set in San Francisco, and every establishing shot of the city had Salesforce Tower and the constructed Salesforce Park in construction in the middle of it. And this is a global blockbuster that's showing from Shanghai to Poland, and it's landing on international eyes not as blight to the city or the death of San Francisco, but as new symbols of growth and vitality. And just like they come and see the Painted Ladies and the Golden Gate Bridge, they're going to come see these too. So as residents, you know, whether your teenager got an earring or whether your partner's trying out a new clothing style, it's always jarring to see physical changes to the people and things that we love. And we do kind of say, oh my gosh, this is some change. But just like the 5 I mentioned that did face heavy criticism, contemporary criticism at the time, these new buildings that we build, while jarring to us right now, will go on to be further icons that people travel the globe to come see and experience firsthand. So as citizens, as we come up, let's bet into the change. Let's lean into the change. Note, this is nothing new. New architecture has always been divisive and scary at first, but these things go on to be icons, even if they don't seem so at the time. So thank you so much for listening. I love what you guys do.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Last week at the Clipper hearing, 232 Clipper, I said there was an important project because it was one of a few demolitions, actual real demolitions that had occurred in Noe Valley in the last 4 years. And I woke up in the other night, in the middle of the night, and said, no, there was others. There were actually 8 demolitions, real demolitions in Noe Valley in the RH2. There were also 2 administrative approvals in the RH1, but I'm not talking about those, I'm talking about the RH2. 4 of these were approved under the old mandatory DR, and the other 4 were approved with the CU. 3 have been completed and occupied. 3 are under construction. 1's awaiting approval from DBI of the addenda, and 1 was just approved last week by you, which is Clipper. 60% of those 8 are speculative projects. 2 are occupied by the family that built, and the one that's proposed is supposed to be occupied by the family that got the approval. So then I thought about everything else that's happened in Noe Valley, and I made a little sheet because I wasn't home. I didn't have my papers, so I went through my head and thought about it, and I said, 33% of what I would call the extreme alterations in Noe Valley in the last 4 years plus, those have had horizontal and vertical expansions, approximately 75% of those have been speculative projects, and they've been in the price range of $4 million or plus, more, often more. And that includes the projects under the 317B7, where they basically absorb the second unit and make it one big giant home. And it doesn't include other neighborhoods where there are similar projects like Mission Dolores or Glen Park or Bernal or the Mission itself, et cetera. Back in 2015, we had the sample with the staff and Commissioner Richards, and the staff concluded with a sample of 5 that 40% of those alterations should have been categorized as demolition. So I just thought about that. I wanted to correct my error that I just said would instead of wouldn't or whatever. That there were actually 8 real demolitions in Noe Valley in the last 4 years, and so here's for the minutes, and I made a copy of what's the minutes for you. But I just want to add that in the 4 years under Section 317. Removal of dwelling units, periodic adjustment of numerical criteria. For the RH1, the administrative approvals, Mr. Sanchez has raised the number 3 times. You, as a commission, have the right to make an adjustment to the demo calcs. Here's the 3 sheets. Wish I had 3 hands. So I suggest that, I don't know what's going to happen with any kind of new demo legislation, but I suggest that maybe you guys think about it. You could at least raise it 3 times. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. I wrote your names on it. You don't have to give them out. They all know who they are. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Shudish. Any other public comment? With that, public comment is now closed.
Okay, Commissioners, so we will move on to your regular calendar. We'll start with item number 6, case number 2017-014010 CRV, fees for certain permit and transportation analysis.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Deborah Landis, Deputy Director of Administration with the Planning Department. You may recall in January and February, we came to you with the budget for the fiscal year that just began a couple of weeks ago. And as part of that budget, we had 2 pieces of legislation. One, Aaron Starr mentioned earlier, is at the full board next week, and it went through with the entire budget process. The second is this one here today. And it is back with you, not because anything has changed, but because our budget resolution did not have findings in it about CEQA and consistency with the master plan and general plan for the city. So we've brought this back today with findings in the resolution so that if you decide to approve it again, it will be able to continue through the legislative process. As a reminder, this is a new fee for a lower cost. We have a transportation fee in the planning code. Our fee schedule has only one. It's about $25,000. This creates a second site circulation review for just about $9,500 for smaller projects that require a lower level of review so that they wouldn't have to pay the higher fee. There's a little bit of cleanup in here as well to clarify some of the existing language. And again, this is exactly what we brought to you in January and February. The only change is that this now has the findings as part of the resolution. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. And I would ask for your support once more.
Thank you, Ms. Landis. Why don't we hear from the public if anyone has comments on the proposed fees? Okay, seeing none, public comment is now closed. Commissioner Koppel.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, Commissioners, so we have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Koppel and a second from Commissioner Moore. We'll take roll. Vice President Melgar.
Aye.
Commissioner Fong. I'm absent. Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And this item passes 5-0. Okay, we will move on to our next item, item number 8, 2015-005525 CWP, Sea Level Rise Adaptation Program and Informational Presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Vice President Melgar. My name is Maggie Wenger. I'm in the citywide division. So about 2 years ago, you heard an informational briefing on the city's sea level rise action plan. And that was not a plan in the way you usually see. It was sort of a plan for how city agencies are going to work together to understand sea level rise impacts in the city and start making our city more resilient over time. And we want that to be for public and private assets, for natural resources, and for our quality of life. You know, we're doing all of this for San Franciscans, for the future of San Francisco. So that was published 2 years ago, 2 years and a couple months. And we've been working on related efforts to that, both the planning department and our partner agencies. One piece that you have likely heard of is the Resilient by Design Challenge, which we were involved in both kicking off, and then there was a site in San Francisco that is now complete. Well, the official challenge is complete. The work continues. We have a Western Shoreline Area Plan Local Coastal Program Amendment that you voted on at the very beginning of this year and was approved by the State Coastal Commission in May, and that is now adopted, and that implementation is moving forward through MTA and Public Works. You heard about a grant last week to do specific planning around Deslayas Creek and transportation infrastructure through some Caltrans funding. Thank you for voting for its approval. And as you know, there is a port seawall program looking at seismic and flood risk along the northeast waterfront. The city is updating its local hazard mitigation plan to include climate change. And we're updating our climate action strategy, which is the climate mitigation, greenhouse gas reduction side of it. But we want to make sure that our climate adaptation and our climate mitigation efforts work in parallel. So what we've been doing on the action plan in particular is really, as we move around this circle, we've reviewed the science. You know, a big part of climate change planning is understanding what we're likely to see, and the science for sea level rise is very good, especially in California. We have a lot of state and local resources poured into this. So that has happened, and we're really into assessing vulnerability, which means what will happen if and when we see this flooding, and then risk, which is really about consequences. And so we've been working with our public infrastructure agencies to understand what does this mean for MUNI, what does this mean for the Public Utilities Commission, what does this mean for our parks, and then what does it mean if those systems face impacts? What does that mean for the people who live here, work here, come to visit? That will all turn into our vulnerability and consequences assessment. This is, again, not yet sort of the list of strategies, not saying, you know, here's what we're moving forward to the capital program, but really trying to get our arms around what are we likely to see over the next decades, all the way to 2100, and how could the city think about what those impacts will actually look like for people. We have a sea level rise coordinating committee. The port staff and planning have been co-chairs to date, but there's 15 public agencies, everyone from public health to Office of Resilience and Capital Planning, Office of Economic and Workforce Development, many different perspectives coming together from the city because this is a problem that crosses agencies. It's not all in anybody's authority or jurisdiction. And this work right now is funded by planning, the port, and the Office of Resilience and Capital Planning. So what does sea level rise mean for San Francisco? You guys have seen versions of this over the years. But the state numbers that we were working with in 2016 and are still working with at this exact moment say that by 2050, which is not that far away now, sea level will rise between 11 and 24 inches. And that means every day it will be that much higher. That doesn't take into account, you know, we will still have El Nino cycles, we will still have storms, we will still have big waves, but you're kind of raising the floor, right? You're raising the baseline tide. That range is pretty small. You know, a 12-inch range, 13-inch range you can work with. You get to 2100 and that range gets a lot bigger. And so that is a different planning challenge to say what's the appropriate level to plan for, how do you invest money in a smart way. So working with that, the state encourages you to use both a most likely number and an upper range. To date, the city has, not regulations, has guidance in place through the capital planning process for public projects that say, definitely understand the impacts of both of these levels on your project, plan for the most likely, and tell us what you would do about the higher end number. You know, what happens if we sort of are in this world where we're looking at 66 inches? If you take that 66-inch number in 2100 and you add a 1% coastal storm to it, which means a storm that is likely to happen on average once every 100 years, That creates what the city has determined as its sea level rise vulnerability zone. This is big. This is about 6% of our land area, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you can see that it, substantial portions of our eastern seaboard. Again, not all areas in this zone are equally vulnerable. Some are likely to see flooding impacts, now in the next couple decades. Some are unlikely to see them until the very end of the century, if even then. But this is sort of the geographic area we're talking about when we talk about where will you potentially see direct sea level rise impacts over time. And then to add to this, the state updated its sea level rise guidance this spring, and they changed the 2100 numbers. And it's not a super simple story, because the story is the mid-range number got lower and the high-end number got much higher. And so we're working now with, there's a science subcommittee of the Sea Level Rise Coordinating Committee for people from the PUC and capital planning and the port about what do we do with these numbers? What's appropriate to do with these numbers? Just a very brief background. It is partially differences in sort of science that's coming from Antarctica. It is also that the state selected a much more precautionary scenario for that high end. They went from sort of the 95th percentile to the 99.5th. So, they changed their risk tolerance, basically. So it's partly the science, it's partly sort of a policy decision from the Ocean Protection Council. We need to do something with this. We're working on that. But it does show that, especially as you get farther out in time, there's potentially a much bigger range of impacts. So what we've been doing since 2016 is working with the infrastructure managing agencies and others to really understand the exposure, which is really the sort of mapping and data part, and then sensitivity and adaptive capacity, which is about, we can sort of predict where water will go based on hydrology and elevation, but how that affects assets varies a lot. So like if I manage Embarcadero Station and I'm worried about water getting in, I have many concerns about mechanical equipment, electrical equipment. It's hugely important to the city that both the Muni and BART stations stay open. Whereas things like, Ocean Beach, or even sort of, less intensely developed areas, whether it's open space or a less used road, they aren't as sensitive. There's more you can do to protect those sites. If you have a short-term flood event, it's less likely to have major impacts. So we've been moving through the exposure, the sensitivity and adaptive capacity for our infrastructure systems, and we're just starting to work on what does that mean for people, for the economy, and for the environment, because that's going to be really important for making decisions about where do we invest, right? What do we do to start protecting from this hazard? So the exposure analysis, these maps are all public, they're all out, you can see them. They don't tell the whole story, it just tells you where water is likely to go based on elevation. Two caveats, this assumes we don't do anything along the shoreline. It also assumes that land is not moving. So it kind of, it has to sort of say, as of 2010, this is what the land looked like. What happens if you sort of run water over that in a model? But we have 10 different water layers we can look at, which is really nice because it lets you kind of see where do we have these tipping points coming? Where does it sort of go from very limited flooding in an area? Like one thing that we see right now during storm tides is that there's kind of some splash on the Embarcadero. Sometimes they put cones out and close a lane, but it's not catastrophic. When does that change? When do we turn into real flooding that will disrupt how people get around, businesses, where, all of that. So having that kind of fine-grained information is really important. And when we do that, we've run that against sort of all of our public infrastructure data layers that we have. So we can talk about how many streets and what size of streets and how many lane miles are affected. That helps Public Works and MTA think about their operating budgets, capital budgets. We've looked at our open space, both city-owned, either through Rec and Park and the port, or federal and state open space along the shoreline. Public land and schools and other community facilities, because that sort of gives a sense. Again, we're sort of having to say, as of right now, what's there. That could look very different in 2100 for all kinds of reasons, but it gives you a sense of the scale of impact. And then when you lay that exposure onto what we know about individual facilities, that helps you get to that vulnerability, that like why does it matter if something floods? What happens to it? So if you think about, this is sort of Fisherman's Wharf in North Beach, you have historic resources there. Historic resources are more sensitive because of their construction type. They're also maybe less adaptive because you're constrained in what you can do, all of that. We also have, sort of city-serving infrastructure that happens to be located along the shoreline. So here it's the Muni Kirkland Yard, but as we go farther south, you'll see other major infrastructure. If you go to the ferry building area, huge commercial areas, the Embarcadero Historic District, and major both city and regional transportation infrastructure from BART, Muni, and the ferry. Mission Creek has extensive flooding. This is an area, this map does not show it as well, but this is an area where you have pretty extensive flooding caused by pretty small areas. So again, having that finer grain mapping that tells you, are there places you could probably go in and do relatively minor interventions and solve for a fair amount of your flooding for, maybe not forever, but for decades, you can really reduce your risk. And then Islayas Creek that you heard a little bit about last week with the grant, but this is an area that has both a lot of private industrial lands, but also sort of public infrastructure industry, so the Southeast Treatment Plant, many Muni facilities, many public works yard, and the port facilities in this area that are at risk. And this was a similar project area to what the Resilient by Design team looked at for Islayas Creek, for those of you who have followed that process. And then on the west side, where the mapping is different because the waves are different, but we've done similar things, in some ways, Ocean Beach is ahead because we have this current erosion problem. And so the policy amendment that we brought to you last year and the beginning of this year is kind of a half step ahead of the rest of the city because we know what our problem is there, and public agencies are already working on implementing projects to pull roadways out of erosion zones and sort of work on restoring the beach so that the beach can adapt itself over time. These are 2018 photos of the beach. This is PUC, part of their reporting on what they're doing for sand moving. So what are we doing next? The vulnerability and consequence assessment is underway. We expect to have an interagency sort of cascading consequences workshop. So rather than saying, SFMTA, what are your issues? And Public Works, what are your issues? And PUC, what are your issues? How do those start to relate to each other? Where are there areas where things overlap? We expect a draft report next spring and then a final report next summer. The Islayas Creek Southeast Mobility Adaptation Strategy grant is moving forward, funded by Caltrans. And then we'll move into citywide adaptation planning. And adaptation planning may mean policy changes that would be something that would come here. It may be individual capital projects that move forward through infrastructure agencies. And the public engagement will be a much bigger part of that effort because a lot of this sort of data work to date has really focused on what do we know about our infrastructure systems, what do we know about the climate hazards. But when you start thinking about what you want to do, that's a much more important public conversation with neighborhoods and with the city as a whole. And then that also ties back into those related efforts at the beginning, the Seawall program, the Hazard and Climate Resilience Plan, all of that. I'm available for questions, but we'll take public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lane. Oh, I just thought you're, okay. So thank you so much for a really great presentation. If any member of the public wants to comment on this, please come up.
So sea level rise and infrastructure is a thing that a lot of people use, I would say, to be like, this is why we can't build housing, is because like the sea's going to get us and the earthquake's going to get us and the lack of water is going to get us and all of our infrastructure is old and decrepit. And like, they're a little right. Our infrastructure is old and decrepit. But one of the main sources of funding, because we have, as a state, been unwilling to roll back Prop 13, which is another whole argument, one of the main funding sources for all of these improvements is the new housing. That is one of the main ways that we see infrastructure improvements, both in our streets and also earthquake prevention and potentially a lot of the seawall stuff. A lot of our old housing is built in such a way that it is at risk for the coming changes in the environment. And a lot of the new housing can be built with those safety things in mind, and also the impact fees that we levy on our new big mega projects. And so in a lot of these conversations that we're having with, the people who come out to like get really upset about like the coming ocean, are the kinds of people who probably need to hear the message that the thing that is going to keep the ocean from getting them is new housing. They need that message that, like, unless they want a parcel tax, we're going to have to rely on some funding from new housing. And so I would recommend that the opportunity for that kind of larger conversation about the role that new housing can be in the neighborhoods can be folded into this seawall conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Any other public comment? Okay, with that, public comment is closed. Director Wren?
Thank you. I just first wanted to thank Maggie for her work on this. We have had the pleasure of actually co-chairing this effort with the port for 3 years now, and it's and I appreciated Mayor Lee's kind of confidence in us and kind of leading this effort, because land use issues are such a critical part of this, and in some ways it's helpful because we are not a capital planning agency, that we can take a step back and look more broadly at these issues. So Maggie's been doing a great job on this work, and I just want to, some of the numbers are, they're at big ranges, and and there's this tendency to think of sea level rise as so far in the future that it's hard to get people's attention. But in fact, we are seeing evidence of it now. And one of the figures that I heard recently was that by 2030, there are some places in the city that will likely see routine flooding in only 12 years from now. So I think it's important for us to kind of think of these things. In some ways, we have time to get it right and to set aside the funding over a number of years to make it happen. On the other hand, there are things that are happening in the short term that we really have to start thinking about. It's not something we can put off to the next generation. So I just again want to thank Maggie and all the work that the city staff have been doing on this.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Richards.
So I guess, wondering out loud, the mission, I think the first mention of climate change and sea level rise was 1988. We had the Mission Bay plan going on since I've been here in the early 90s. Then we had Better Neighborhoods plan mid to late 90s through 2000. Rhetorical question would be, if we really knew these stark numbers, which were very sobering back then, would we have directed development into these vulnerable areas? Is, I think, a very valid question people are probably wondering, and we still are. I guess the other question is, are there any impact fees that are assessed on development in these vulnerable areas to help pay for these things that are going to protect that very development?
Not through us, not through you. The port, on some of their leases for Mission Rock and for Pier 70, has established a small financing mechanism that hopefully, over time, small amounts add up. But that is something that is actually this morning was at a regional workshop on financing the future, exactly this. How do you pay for these things? And that is a big part of it, is how do you make sure development is protecting itself. The Treasure Island Development Authority project also has a financing mechanism that goes along with it that supports what they assume their future shoreline infrastructure needs will be.
Okay. So, when I got a mortgage, I had to have one of the thousands of pages of documents that I remember going through, and the closed package was some type of a floodplain assessment, where it was some report was where am I in a floodplain or not, and then if I was, I wouldn't get insurance, or I'd have to pay more, and my bank wouldn't give me a mortgage. Have we seen any buildings not get financing or not go forward because they're in vulnerable areas?
So San Francisco does not have an adopted federal emergency management agency floodplain, which is what a lot of those mortgage requirements are tied to. There are draft maps out that presumably will be adopted at some point in the future. But that doesn't forecast climate risk. That's all about, are you just in a current floodplain?
Existing, okay.
Commissioner, if I could just add to the answer a little bit. In addition, the Central Soma CFD that you recently passed on to the Board of Supervisors does allow for some of that finance district funding to be put towards sustainability, which we would imagine would include sea level rise. It could be one of the items that gets funded there. Also, you've seen different development agreements come before this body that would also address sea level rise and climate change.
Has there been any change in the way we construct things, especially in vulnerable areas, to help withstand these issues? Building code changes and things?
Not through code changes yet, although we have sort of broad flood resilience language in our general plan. But you look at Mission Rock and their plans, or Pier 70 and their plans, and sort of shoreline adaptation and using either natural site elevation or constructed site elevation is a big part of those projects. It's kind of hidden, right? You see the final design, and
Right.
maybe that's not what you're looking at, but they have graded up substantially
Okay.
And concentrated more intensive development in higher areas.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Koppel.
Thank you for the great report. Really appreciate the thoroughness. I take this topic pretty seriously and think that, when looking at topics like this, it's good to have healthy pessimism and skepticism, just because I feel better knowing that even though some of these numbers doubled, that we're on top of the fact that they're doubling, and think that we might even need to take it a step further and have plans for if it triples or quadruples, just to be safe. And things do take time to materialize, but sometimes they materialize faster than we think they would. And I always think it's in our best interest to be equipped and planned for the worst case scenario. So I'm glad to see we're keeping tabs on this and want to hear more later. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to echo just thanks for this report. It was really eye-opening in a time where we get often depressing news, seeing one, that our city is ahead on its emission goals, that we're going to be reducing our emissions by 40% in 2025 and 80% by 2050 is really exciting. Yay, San Francisco. And then also that we're being visionary and forward-thinking. I think I hadn't really thought of the horizon of 2100. Oftentimes you think maybe 40 to 50 years in advance, and just thinking about the fact that I will not be around, but I want to make sure that we don't pass the buck to the next generation. Just kind of lit the fire under me to understand these issues more and really to consider them as items come before this Planning Commission. I also am thankful for your comments on the fact that we are going to see districts that get repeated flooding and other issues over the next, even as soon as 12 years. That was one question that came up for me, and how we can just continue to be in conversation with you and others about those districts, and how instead of waiting for even a year from now for the research to come back in, how we can, if we have a sense, begin to think about those districts now and how we fund mitigation efforts. So thank you for this report.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore.
Thank you for the report. It's very interesting to periodically revisit the subject. For the last 15 years, all major projects in the shoreline band have already prepared with sea level rise strategies. The first one, really major effort 15 years ago, was Treasure Island, which took a 2 or 3 step approach. It's not just starting with raising land to a ultimate predicted level, but incrementally providing for land as it comes to development to be raised. This goes on to projects in the sports jurisdiction, from the refurbishing of the agricultural building just south of the ferry building, to everything marching down the southern waterfront to Pier 70, to India Basin, which is coming up next week, moving down to Shipyard 2, Bayview Hunters Point, Candlestick Point. All of these projects have major strategies built into the development itself, not just on the shore side, but how they deal with buildings sitting on elevated lands and dealing with incremental change in sea level rise. You will hear more about that, particularly with a focus on that subject. I think next week we're looking at India Basin. You see some strategies which explain your question, Commissioner Richards.
Thank you, Commissioner Fong.
Thank you. I just wanted to lend my general support in Maggie's work in the Port of San Francisco and Planning Department. Obviously, like Commissioner Moore just mentioned, we've been working on this watching it for quite a while. And it's something that's difficult to get excited about, although that's terribly important. And I do want to excite the public about this. And it's one of those slow burn items. But if we think it's expensive now, it will only be more expensive later, both physically and monetarily. So lend that support. And thank you for all that work. And I know that I think you were there when Venice, Italy. Were you that Venice, Italy came and spoke about Venice and what they had been doing to prevent some sea level rise and sort of their best practice scenarios, maybe a little bit smaller scale, but the Exploratorium held that forum, which was quite good. But anyway, it's a global problem. We're going to tackle it creatively here locally.
Thank you, Commissioner Richards.
Just one follow-up question to Commissioner Koppel's point. Is there kind of a rule of thumb, the more you get close to 100% effectiveness, the rate of expenditure you have to make in order to achieve that safety? Because we've got competing, money's not endless, so to take it from 122 inches to 200 inches, that's to say double, is the amount we have to spend double, or is it triple or 10 times? I mean, how much? I think that has to play into the discussion, but I like being foolproof, but how much does it cost?
Yeah, I think that's something the city has wrestled with on capital projects and certainly through the development agreements. One thing that we're trying to use the Azaleas Creek grant money to do is actually think about what are these pathways to 2100 that you could be on, and where are these triggers where we're going to know in 2050 if we're in that 6-foot world, 12-foot world, or we're going to have a lot better idea than we do right now. We're going to know what's happened with carbon emissions worldwide. We're going to know more about Antarctica. Hopefully there's good news in there somewhere, but if there's not, you'll have chances to make further investment. But another thing you can do is build in more capacity as you go. So a simple example is a levee. If you give yourself more horizontal space, you can go higher later when you need to. If you max out your horizontal space, you can't add more height even if you want to. So if you can build in that capacity, it would take more money later, but at least you have the space to do it, the foundation to do it.
You can iterate.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's not we have to make the decision now. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Moore.
I hate to do that, but I do think we need to remind ourselves that at this moment, the discussion about sea level rise falls on deaf ears in Washington, and I think that is to the detriment of the rest of the country really helping to address this as a countrywide question. We have sea level rise also on the East Coast. We have the entire Louisiana coast, Florida, etc. And the problems are far, far larger than us just sitting here thinking about our own vulnerability. But again, to repeat with a deaf ear in Washington, I think we are pressed to speak loud and clearly of what the issues are.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, so we will move on with our next item, item number 9, case number 2015-010013 ENB for the draft environmental impact report at 30 Otis Street.
Okay, good afternoon, Commission members. I'm Julie Moore, Senior Environmental Planner and EIR Coordinator for the 30 Otis Street project. I'm joined today by my colleague Eilish Tuffy, Preservation Technical Specialist. Is she starting? Is that the court reporter? Are you starting? Oh, okay, good. Members of the consultant team and project sponsor team are also present. The item before you is review and comment on the 30 Otis Street project draft environmental impact report, or draft EIR. The purpose of today's hearing is to take public comments on the adequacy, accuracy, and completeness of the draft EIR pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and San Francisco's local procedures for implementing CEQA. No approval action on this document is requested at this time. The public review period for the proposed project's draft EIR began on June 13th and will continue until 5 p.m. on Friday, July 27th, 2018. I'll now provide a brief overview of the proposed project. The project site is currently developed with 5 buildings from 1 to 3 stories in height. The project would demolish the 5 buildings, merge the 5 lots into 1 lot, and construct a residential building with ground floor retail and arts activity use. The building would include a 10-story podium structure extending across the entire site and a 27-story single tower near the corner of Otis and 12th Street. It would range from 85 to 250 feet in height and would be approximately 485,000 square feet. The building would include 423 residential units, 3 ground floor retail spaces, and new studios and performance space for the City Ballet School, which currently operates on the site. One of the site buildings, the 14 to 18 Otis Street building, is individually eligible for inclusion on the California Register of Historical Places under Criterion 3 at a local level of significance for its architecture. The draft DIR concluded that demolition of this building would be a significant and unavoidable impact. Other impacts to historical architectural resources were found to be less than significant or less than significant with mitigation. The draft DIR found that project construction would result in substantial interference with pedestrian, bicycle, or vehicle circulation and accessibility to adjoining areas, and potentially significant delays to transit due to the demolition, relocation, or delay of a key feature of the Muni Forward Transit project and the location of a staging area adjacent to the transit lane along Otis Street for an approximately 2-year period. Construction of the proposed project also may overlap with the construction of other nearby projects. With mitigation, this was determined to be significant and unavoidable project level and cumulative transportation impact. Finally, the draft DIR found that project-level wind impacts would be less than significant. However, with the development of foreseeable projects in the vicinity, cumulative wind impacts would be significant. While design measures could substantially reduce cumulative wind impacts, this impact was determined to be significant and unavoidable. A hearing to receive the Historic Preservation Commission's comments on the draft DIR was held on June 20th, 2018. I provided you with a copy of the HPC's letter. At the hearing, the HPC concurred with the conclusion of the draft DIR that the proposed project would result in a significant and unavoidable impact on the historic resource at 14 to 18 Otis Street. Further, the HPC found that the alternatives analyzed are adequate and honest in their undertaking and analysis, and agreed that they recommend adoption of the proposed project due to overriding considerations. The HPC also agreed with the proposed mitigation measures with a recommendation for expanding the scope of the historic documentation to include the context of the block and its original setting. Today, the Planning Department is seeking comments on the adequacy and accuracy of the information contained in the draft DIR. For members of the public who wish to speak, please state your name for the record. Please speak slowly and clearly so the court reporter can make an accurate transcript of today's proceedings. Staff is not here to answer questions today. Comments will be transcribed and responded to in writing in the comments and responses document, which will respond to all relevant written and verbal comments received during the public comments period. Those who are interested in commenting on the draft DIR in writing by mail or email may submit their comments to me, Julie Moore, EIR Coordinator, at 1650 Mission Street, Suite 400, by 5 p.m. on July 27th. There's a handout there if you need that written down. We anticipate publication of the comments and responses document this fall, followed by the EIR certification hearing. Unless the commissioners have questions, I respectfully suggest that the public hearing on this item be opened.
Thank you very much. With that, we will hear public comment on this item. Anyone who wishes to submit public comment on the draft DIR, please come up and do so now. Ms. Clark.
Yeah. This is a great project. This has the potential. Sorry, my name is Laura Clark for the court record. I run YIMBY Action, YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. It's a great project. It has the potential to do a lot of good. I would like for us to take a moment for this EIR and reflect on how much time and money and very elaborate bureaucracy is being spent on this. And is that going to get us the quantity of housing that we need? This seems like a great project, and yet we are spending a lot of bureaucratic time on these kinds of discretionary processes because of the way that we have constructed our bureaucracy. And there is an ability that we have to make a lot of these things non-discretionary and avoid these kinds of hearings. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Ken Patzel. I'm the Administrative Director of City Ballet. We're the second largest ballet school in San Francisco, And I'd just like to bring to light, in an economic environment where the arts are just going by the wayside, we've just had 2 long-term ballet schools close and leave San Francisco because they couldn't afford to make it. This group has made a commitment to the arts that we as City Ballet appreciate more than I can even say here. We have a long-term home thanks to this 30 Otis group, and we're proud to be a part of it, and I just wanted to bring that to light. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on the draft EIR? Please come up. Okay. Well, seeing none, public comment is now closed. Commissioners, Commissioner Moore.
Commenting on the EIR. The EIR is set up in its typical way, and many aspects of it are very good. There's one particular subject matter I am very concerned about, and that is something to do that the project is not put into the context of the hub. The hub is a major new intervention, a district that we have spent relatively little time on except on focusing on buildings within the hub. However, the context of the hub is not discussed, nor is really the already approved nature of some of the major buildings which are supposed to give character, form, as well as architectural flavor to the hub. And I believe that that is a major omission because this is a critical site in this very complicated intersection where every building really depends on each other in order to create place, which I think is a prerequisite in which this building needs to function. We cannot just continue to look at buildings as islands, but buildings need to indeed create a larger context when we are transforming major portions of the city. I believe that the EIR, as it is the draft, as it's written, falls short of giving us a broader overview, one, about the 3D context in which this building will occur, 2, reflecting on the larger principles of the hub neighborhood plan, pedestrian connections, open space, light, air, etc. It has to all work with each other, including the simple functioning of where crosswalks are, where view relationships and markers are. I would suggest that we add a little bit more in that description so that when the EIR comes forward and ultimately we will be asked to approve the building, the EIR has carefully reflected and described that particular aspect of the project.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Richards.
That's not something I actually thought of, what Commissioner Moore just said, honestly. But I do agree with her that I don't think we should slow the project down, but I would like to actually see more context and relationship to the hub because we're going to be doing an EIR for the hub itself. This is probably a project from the case number that's been in the hopper for quite some time. And it'll be moving forward. Comments I have are on at least and I find myself asking these same questions from prior DEIRs. Here's a new one. Because it's eligible to be on the California Register, if you were to apply, is it a sure thing? It's a rhetorical question. The State Historic Preservation Office just listed because the 7 criteria have been met. I don't understand that because we had 150 Eureka here last week, and it's also eligible. When I actually got into a discussion with project sponsor on that, they said it's not a historic resource. But I said it's eligible. So what is the definition of actually historic resource? So that's one. The other one is, and I've had this on other projects, I understand this building in and of itself has the 7 elements of integrity. However, how many other buildings like this still exist in San Francisco with the 7 elements of integrity intact? So we had this same very issue with taxpayer block buildings erected after the 1906 earthquake that were still around, and I kept saying, well, we're going to demolish these ones on Pine Street. We demolished some on Market Street. How many are left? I mean, when I drive through South of Market, I see a lot of these buildings that look the same. So is this one of 1,000, one of 500? I know if there were a historic district of these type of structures, even if it's not contiguous, we'd get statistics that said this is one of 468 in the Tenderloin Uptown historic district, and we're able to put it in context. I just can't put this one in context because we're just looking at this one building. the visual graphics are great. I do agree with the Historic Preservation Commission. I wish we had the same visual graphics here as we had on 150 Eureka. I think when we do historic preservation alternatives, we should shade the building in a different way so that we can see the new addition versus what's old, the old addition, the old building. I'm sorry, and this did that very well. Let me see here. What are any other things? I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fong?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm supportive of this project and the path that it's on right now. I'm willing to vote in support. But I do want to just pick up a little bit on Commissioner Moore's comment in that it's exciting. The hub is coming together, right? This is one of the pieces of it. I'm curious if some other opportunities that maybe the Unified School District site, I'm not sure where what's gonna happen there. The Plumbers Union is coming together. Hopefully that whole back alley of the Plumbers Union abuts this particular property, and it's gonna be, has an opportunity of being charming back there. I think we look at it right now and say, hey, we want to change this, but I want to make sure that we are all on the same page about changing it for the better and making it charming and have a great street activation along with just housing, which I know Laura is excited about. So anyway, I just kind of paused for a mere second just to scratch our heads and say, we've got a cool opportunity here. Let's make sure we maximize it.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
Did you? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Commissioners, we'll move on to your next item. Item number 10, case number 2017-0109, 010891 CUA at 3001 Steiner Street. Request for conditional use authorization to establish general retail use to a formerly retail use.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Matt Dito, Department Staff. The item before you is a request for conditional use authorization for a change of use to Formula Retail at 3001 Steiner Street, doing business as Trek Bicycles. The subject property is located within the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District in the Marina neighborhood and is currently occupied by City Cycles, a retail bicycle shop. Trek Bicycles proposes to occupy the space, which is 2,350 square feet, with no interior modifications or building expansion. Trek Bicycles is a retail sales use with 55 locations worldwide, and the proposed project representing their only location in San Francisco. The proposed project will allow the subject property to remain as a bike shop serving a citywide clientele. The project proposes minimal alterations to the facades of the building, mainly signage. To date, the department has not received any public comment in support or opposition to the project. While the project would nominally increase both the concentration of Formula Retail as well as the amount of linear frontage devoted to Formula Retail in the district, it will allow the neighborhood to retain its current mix of neighborhood serving and citywide serving uses. The project proposes the retention of a bike shop, ensuring the continued use of a tenant space on the ground floor of a commercial building. There is currently one other bicycle shop in the Union Street NCD. The project would also not expand or alter any architectural features of the aesthetic character of the property. The department finds that the project is on balance consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan, as well as necessary, desirable, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. For these reasons, the department recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project with conditions as outlined in Exhibit A. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item? Seeing not, oh, go ahead.
Hi, Commissioners. So I used to live right off Union Street in this corridor, and I think when you look at kind of Union versus Chestnut, you have an interesting comparison where one commercial corridor is vibrant, it is thriving. I don't think there is a single empty storefront on Chestnut. And 3 blocks away on Union Street, I was reading a Socket Site article last year where they said there were over 30 vacant storefronts on that 6-block corridor and in the side streets alone. And I think when you look at the difference between the two, Chestnut, for example, has very little restrictions on what can be done there. You can open up brand new restaurants, new bars, where Union Street, it does restrict opening up new restaurants and bars on that street. It has a lot more flexibility of use and allowing for different types of businesses and restaurants to move in, whereas Union Street is a lot more restricted. And as I kind of look over our city as a whole, I see that a lot of times the corridors that are struggling with vacant storefronts are often the neighborhoods that have the most restrictions or have, community merchants associations that are often stepping in and kind of trying to block competing uses and things like that. So I think we should support this business on Union Street. I think any new business, whether formula or independent mom and pop shop on Union Street, gives vibrancy to that corridor, which is a kind of a domino effect to other storefronts. It is one that has a lot of vacancy right now, and I think by letting this one through will help that problem overall. I think if it was like Hayes Street, right, it's a different thing because that's thriving even though they don't have formula retail. Here, I think we just need a little bit more activity, so I would encourage you to approve it and let that beautiful street thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is David Ford. I'm the applicant for this. I wasn't sure if this is the time I was supposed to speak, but
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
Is
go
that-
ahead.
Is this the time?
Sorry about that. Yes.
No worries. I just want to make sure.
Yes,
I just,
sorry.
very little to add. I just wanted to say that we're in agreement with the staff report and conditions of approval. City Cycle was acquired by Trek. They acquired the two locations, one in San Francisco and one in Corte Madera. So it's primarily just a change in ownership and a change in signage. Everything else is going to be the same as is currently there.
Yes.
I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I apologize. I think we're both sort of not used to this. So, okay. With that, a public comment is closed, and Commissioner Richards.
So just a point of clarification, Prop G in 2009 was passed by the voters, which is why this is before us. It's not something that's particular just to this business district or this commercial district versus any other. There are a few in the city, such as Hayes Valley, that has an outright ban on formula retail because it was passed legislatively. So that's why it's here before us, not because of a merchants association or neighbors. It's law, and it can only be outdone by the voters. This is a like use to like use, bike shop to bike shop. It's not a 17,000 chain Walgreens or a 15,000 chain Starbucks that makes San Francisco look like everywhere else in the world, which is why we have a CU process for formula retail. I'm fully supportive of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore.
City Cycles used to sell Trek bicycles, so it's just basically just a bicycle store. So I'm in full support of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I would agree. I pass by this particular corner probably once or twice a week and just know the other bike shop in town and feel like this bike shop actually complements so that people can have a wide range of options. And just because it is like to like, just a change of use, I'm also in support of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Fong.
Pedal on, motion to approve.
Second. Okay, Commissioners, so we have a motion from Commissioner Fong and a second from Commissioner Koppel. Commissioner Melgar?
Aye.
Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And so moved. Passes 6-0. On to your next item on your calendar. Item number 11, case number 2016-012941 CUA for 714 Rhode Island Street. Request for conditional use authorization proposing to demolish the existing two-story single-family home and construct a new five-story residential structure with two dwelling units.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Michael Christensen, Department staff. The item before you is a request for conditional use authorization to allow the demolition of the existing single-family residence located at 714 Rhode Island Street and construction of a new five-story, two-unit residential building. The subject property is located in the Potrero Hill neighborhood on a 25-foot by 100-foot lot near the intersection of Rhode Island Street and 19th Street. The property is located in the RH2 zoning district, a 40X Height and Bulk district, and the Showplace Square Potrero Hill area plan. The site is currently developed with one single-family home built in 1904 that was determined to not be a historic resource and is built over a natural rock outcropping. The proposed replacement structure has a total size of approximately 6,356 square feet, divided into two three-bedroom units totaling 2,641 square feet and 2,309 square feet. At packet publication, the department had received 4 written letters in support of the project. Since packet publication, the department has received 2 comments expressing concern with the project. One comment was received by a resident of an apartment unit in the large apartment building to the south, expressing concern that the proposed 5th floor would reduce the amount of light afforded to multiple units in the building. The second comment was received from a neighbor across the street and expressed concern that at approximately 2,600 and 2,300 square feet in size, these 3-bedroom units are extremely large, particularly for only having 3 bedrooms, and are unaffordable by design. The commenter requested that the commission reduce the size of the units to render them more compatible with the neighborhood. As the project complies with the planning code and meets the findings for approval, the department recommends approval of the project. While true that the proposed units are significantly larger than many others in the neighborhood, the project maximizes the density allowed on the site at 2 units, as allowed by the zoning RH2. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Do we have a project sponsor?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Apologies, we have a project team is currently stuck in traffic. I wonder if we could move on. Could we move on to the next item and then move
We
on
already
to
started hearing it, so we could have asked before we started.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you ready to make a presentation?
I mean, I guess if that's the option. I mean, I think the basics of the project are pretty straightforward. Obviously, you have the materials in your packet. It's been designed to be compatible with the existing property. It's a small house that's on the property, and it'll be replaced with 2 units that maximize the density for that area. They're 2 family-size units that are designed to be large enough for family use, but not overly large. We do propose a roof deck, which has been significantly pulled back from the street front. And the reason for the roof deck is that because there'll be 2 units, there'll be a rear yard that will be the open space for the lower unit, and then that will be the open space for the upper unit. The neighbors are generally supportive of the project as being compatible with the existing buildings. And in terms of privacy, view lines, that's all been designed in order to be compatible with the surrounding buildings. There's no loss of rent control because it's a single-family property, and again, maximizing the unit count. And we have staff support. Other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. We're happy to take any questions, and the rest of the project team should be here any moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there a public comment on this item? Please come up.
Did you want remarks about that particular?
About that particular project. If you have a public comment on that particular project, yes.
On the land, on the 714 Rhode Island?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, my name is Bonnie Barron, and I live across the street at 731 Rhode Island, and have lived there for over 20 years, and that the little house on the hill across the street has been there the whole time. In fact, it's been there since 1904 at least. It's pre-earthquake. It survived the earthquake. It's a fine single-family house. And I know that in the planning code, you are allowed to demolish a building in order to provide more affordable housing. And I would argue that the housing that's going to be provided would certainly not be affordable. And I think that the existing structure is a sturdy, livable, fine house for a family.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item?
Hi, Laura Clark, Yimby Action. This is the easy stuff. This is taking an unaffordable single-family home that would otherwise see a gut rehab that would just bougify the existing single-family home so that we would have a very expensive single-family home not protected by rent control, and instead we get 2 units. This is also a good example of where if we had allowed ADUs in new construction, we could have in fact seen 3 or 4 or even 5 units. But instead we have the legally allowed RH2 2 units, better than 1. They're going to be nice, big, family-sized units with 3 bedrooms. It's the kind of stuff that will be very beneficial for, we've seen an exodus of families from this city. We need more of these kinds of large 3-bedroom units. It's in context. There's a giant apartment building right to the left. There's just no reason to not make this an easy approval. And if we make these kinds of approvals difficult, we are in fact disincentivizing these kinds of lower margin projects. These are wood frame construction. They are not the giant condo buildings. This is the kind of missing middle housing that we need to make easy. If we make these projects difficult, if we scale them back, if we make it so that we're not making it so that any idiot can build one of these, then we're not going to see them come to this commission. Anyone should be able to take a little rinky-dink single-family home and make it into a nice little multi-family walk-up apartment building. Side note, the timer's not going down, and I don't know when to stop. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, with that, public comment is now closed. Commissioners? Commissioner Koppel.
I don't see any problems with this one. That was my comment. What would like to see what other commissioners have to think?
Commissioner Richards.
Prime opportunity site for densifying the city. I don't think when we see what these units are going to be priced at that I would be saying that they are for the missing middle, that it adds an additional unit to the housing stock and it's much improved over what's there now. So I'm very happy to support.
Commissioner Moore.
I see this a little differently. In a neighborhood where a single-family home is 1,040 square feet, to put 2 units in, which becomes 6,356 square feet, is a delta that I do not think is supportive of our housing shortage in no form. When you look at the plans of this particular project, it is basically about oversized bedrooms and oversized closets galore. I do not see any real dedication to family or family-dedicated space in these units. And I regret that we do not use a technique like West Hollywood, for example. I talked with Planner Christensen about it, where we have unit size restrictions in order to add more units into such an opportunity site. I think that the units as proposed are not at all supportive of context, where we have a more modest, more middle range units. They indeed inject supersized units which are not really designed for families if you take a closer look at how they're laid out. As this is my opinion as looking at the unit plans a little bit more closely, including their sizing, and it raises for me a number of questions, and I most likely will vote against it. However, as I see support of the Commission for the project, I will just have a different opinion about it.
Please, no sounds. Thank you. Commissioner Moore. I'm sorry, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Moore, for sharing your perspective. It's always appreciated. I, having kind of visited the site and kind of looked at the context of the neighborhood, feel like this is an opportunity site with the apartment building that has the height that it will match. I do, just kind of looking also at the history of the home, the sale history, the going price of the home, believe that this is a great opportunity for us to turn this into 2 units as opposed to one non-affordable house. With that, I move to approve with conditions.
Second.
Yeah, so I will just say for myself, I think these are large units. I agree, Commissioner Moore, but I don't think they're outrageous. So a little under 3,000 square feet per unit for 3-bedroom and a family of 4. about 750 square feet per person who, it's large. It's not, I think, outrageous. And I think I agree with Commissioner Richards that they're not for the missing middle. But it does make a dent in our housing shortage, so I will be supporting this project as well.
Okay, commissioners, there is a motion on the floor from Commissioner Johnson and a second from Commissioner Fong. And we'll take up that motion. Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
No.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Vice President Malgar?
Aye.
So moved, 5-1. And so just to give you a quick update, we'll take one of your items out of order. We'll move to item number 13 next, which is case number 2017-015706 CUA for 400 Winston Drive, the Stonestown conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Elizabeth Jonkier of Planning Staff. The project before you at 400 Winston Drive would reconfigure the existing Macy's building at Stonestown Galleria. It would reconfigure the building into a new retail mix, including a cinema, a supermarket, and various retail tenants. The proposed project would renovate the facades and roof of the building and replace the opaque ground floor frontage on 20th Avenue with a more transparent street frontage. Various hardscape and landscape improvements for adjacent outdoor common areas are also proposed. Construction activities would include interior demolition, site preparation, grading, and interior upgrades. All work is anticipated to be completed in overlapping phases, commencing in August and completed in July 2020. The entire site was originally permitted as a shopping mall through a series of approvals between 1948 and 1953. The most recent expansion of the mall occurred in 1986 via a planned unit development and the conditional use process, as well as an EIR. The site is within the 65D bulk district, and per Planning Code Section 270, the D bulk delineation limits the maximum length of this building to 110 feet, with a maximum diagonal dimension of 140 feet for that portion of the building above 40 feet in height. Per previous approvals, bulk exceptions have been granted for the existing building's maximum building length and diagonal dimensions. The proposed project intensifies this exception with additional volume on the roof for the cinema. In order for the project to proceed, the Commission must grant the conditional use authorization to amend the existing PUD. Since publication of the packet, one item of public comment has been received in general support of the project. The public commenter does note items of concern related to traffic, but these issues were addressed as part of the transportation impact analysis study completed as part of the environmental review process. The Urban Design Advisory Team has reviewed the project and supports the redesign of the Macy's building. The department recommends approval with conditions and finds that the project is on balance consistent with the general plan, and that the project's bulk is in keeping with the building's scale and massing of a large mall, articulating the new spaces in keeping to the extent possible with the unique characteristics of the site and the existing building. I have passed forward, in case you didn't receive the email, the conditions of approval that were inadvertently left out of the packet. This concludes staff presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Do we have a project sponsor?
Hello, my name is David Sincata. I'm here on behalf of General Growth Properties, who is the new owner of Macy's, of the Macy's facility. General Growth Properties owns the rest of the mall, and when Macy's made its determination that it was going to close down, they purchased that one large parcel. That's because they have a long-term commitment to Stonestown Galleria. They want to see it expand and revitalize. You can see from the materials that have already been presented to you that this is a much more enlivened Stonestown Galleria. The matter that's before you is an exception just to the bulk requirements, and the bulk requirements are, as you may know, only particularly drafted for sites, standard sites in San Francisco, 25 by 100, 50 by 100. They do not really apply to a large suburban mall such as Stonestown Galleria. And for that reason, in the past, bulk exceptions like this have been granted through the CU process for other portions of Stonestown, and they are now, we're asking for a similar bulk exception. The height limit is not going to be extended. It's still, the project is below 65 feet. The only reason for this is for the preparations for the penetrations of the roof for the theaters, which again will not be visible, particularly from the pedestrian experience. I can give you additional malls. So the reason we're here is for to approve this. The idea is that we want to be able to get back in front of the commission, get this reopened as quickly as possible. As Ms. Jonkier has said, the earliest we're expecting is the end of 19 and the early part of 2020. I want to, before I finish my comments, I do want to thank the staff, particularly Elizabeth Jonkier and Alicia Shao, who have helped us. We do not obviously want to keep the Macy's building vacant and dark as long as it is, and they have done great service to get us done through as quickly as possible for the environmental review as well as this project review. So I want to thank them. We have the architect here if you have any further questions about the bulk exception, but I think it's fairly routine, and we're here for any additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we will take public comment on this item. Would any member of the public like to comment? Okay, with that, public comment is now closed. Commissioner Moore.
I'm glad to see that there is an adaptive reuse strategy to hold this shopping center together across the country. We're seeing many shopping centers fail, particularly when anchor store fails. It's mostly pretty much the end of the story. Very glad to see a very interesting reuse adaptive strategy. I personally don't believe that height and bulk in this particular situation matters. If this is not C3, where joint harmonies between height and bulk are important, this is pretty much a freestanding, taller form surrounded by ample setbacks to all sides. So I am in support of it and actually congratulate the developer as well as staff making this possible at the speed that they did before any major damage to the functioning of the center is really happening. So thank you. I make a motion to approve with conditions.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Koppel.
My second should probably notify everyone that I'm also in support of this project. A lot of people still don't even know this part of town exists. I grew up about a mile or so away and then went to high school right behind here. This is by far definition of an opportunity site. Very large shopping center surrounded by also a very large parking lot. I'm also going to be excited to hear later on down the road what's happening with the existing movie theater. There's also an existing movie theater behind this mall. So hopefully down the road something will be done with that lot as well. But very excited to see this today, and I'm very in favor of as much bulk as possible here. Thanks.
Commissioner Fong.
Great. Share the same thoughts as well. And I think this is a great creative step forward to put a theater in the Macy's building. As Commissioner Koppel said, that's a tremendous parking lot that maybe doesn't need to be a parking lot in the future, and maybe some development or opportunity there, whether it's housing related or more retail or job creation, I think is something to study. Recently, we got a informational item from San Francisco State, and the work that they're doing. If you haven't already taken a look at their study, I think it's a great opportunity to see how those two projects fold together and maybe combine and become a little more of a synergy place for the area. But it's a great location for this type of use, so supportive as well. Thank you.
I am supportive as well, and you know, this is walking distance from my house, so I'm excited about it. It's not just a theater; it's a grocery store too, and that's really needed. But I did have a question about the existing movie theater in the back of the mall on the other side of the street. It's an independent, a very charming movie theater. They run older movies. It is perfectly preserved in 1971, I think. So I'm wondering what the plans are for that space, or I also wouldn't want to do anything to drive an existing business out of business, so.
Yes, my name is Francisco Gutierrez. I'm the developer for Stonestown for GGB. Well, the good news is that the operator in that movie theater is going to be the operator of the new movie theater.
I see.
So the idea is to provide them a new facility so that once they relocate, we can start looking at that parking lot, right?
It's huge.
Now, having said that, we've been talking with the community for the last couple of years about future plans. And I think the first step is to reengage the community, start learning more about what they need, what they're looking for. But we do see it as a future opportunity. We just haven't had a chance to really put a timeline to that yet.
Great, thank you so much.
Can I just add one more?
Yes, Commissioner Fong.
One more just social comment. I think what you're getting at is Stonestown for many generations has been somewhat the social center for that part of the city. And that whether that means you're a high school kid and you have nothing to do but you want to hang out in a safe place, or you've got to buy a gift for your mom or whatever it is, but it is a social center. And so I think Commissioner Melgar is sharing with, and I agree, that it's important to keep that as this fabric in the social center of that part of town.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, so we have a motion from Commissioner Moore and a second from Commissioner Koppel. With that motion, Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Vice President Melgar?
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes 6-0. So we will now move back on to item number 12. For case number 2016-001190 CUA for 4143 to 4145 24th Street, a request for conditional use authorization pursuant to Planning Code Sections 303 and 764 to establish approximately 2,582 square foot dental medical service use in the existing building.
No.
Project sponsor still isn't here. They're going faster than we thought.
Okay.
I think we all think going faster than we thought.
Now that you've called it, do we just go ahead, or
We can go on to the next item, and then come back to this one. But we're moving on to your discretionary review calendar is next.
I do think by the time I've finished the presentation, they will be
Okay.
here.
That's fine.
Okay.
So thank you.
If not, then.
They're not required to be there.
Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commission. Jeff Horn, Planning Department staff. The item before you is a request for conditional use authorization at 4143 24th Street. The project site is located on the south side of 24th Street between Castro and Diamond Streets in the Noe Valley 24th Street Commercial District. The project proposes to construct and establish a dentistry office doing business as Aesthetic Dentistry of Noe Valley in a ground floor commercial space currently occupied as a residential garage and a lower residential unit within a one-story over garage, two-family dwelling. The project also proposes a horizontal addition, a one-story vertical addition, and to relocate the existing ground floor dwelling unit to the newly created third floor. At the time of the publishing of the case report, no comments have been received from the public, but the project sponsor had done a major effort of outreach to the two adjacent neighbors. This project came to planning originally as a proposed full demolition of a single-family home and new construction of a four-story over basement structure with the ground floor dental office in 3 residential units. In review of the application, planning staff found that there had been an existing historic dwelling unit behind that garage, and therefore staff no longer supported full demolition of the building. The project before you will relocate this existing unit to a new floor, and the project does not exceed the thresholds of building removal per section 317. The project sponsor currently leases a dental office across the street at 4162 24th Street, and she purchased this building with the intent to establish and own her own building that housed her dental office. So therefore, staff recommends approval of the project. The department finds that the project is on balance consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan and meets all applicable requirements of the planning code. And the proposed conversion of a garage will add a more active use storefront to the block. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions. And I emailed the commission PDFs of renderings that were created for the project, and I wanted to hand these out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It does not look like the project sponsor is here. Oh, they're here. Okay, project sponsor, please come up and make your presentation.
Hello, Commissioner. My name is Joyce Chan. The owner is parking the car. Okay, so we try. I just arrived here, and I'm the project sponsor. And currently, this building is a two-story building with a car garage and a in-law behind the car garage, and the owner being that nearby 24th Street for her dental office, 18 years, and now she is ready for fire space for her own dental office, and we use entire ground floor for her dental office, and we moved the unit to upstairs. That's why we need one story on the top. Okay, but we set back to the area of the top floor is almost same similar area as the ground floor behind the car garage. Okay, and I talked to the neighbor, have a meeting with the neighbor, adjacent neighbors, and they are all happy. Special on the right-hand side, face the building on the right-hand side, we have a couple meetings with him, and he's very happy about my design. And I am here to answer if you have any question regarding the design. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we will take a public comment on this item. So if anyone has public comment, please come up. Okay. Did you? Okay. With that, public comment is now closed. Commissioners, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. For staff, I just had one question. In reviewing this document, I saw that, as you mentioned, the project sponsor had originally come with a 3-unit building, which is really interesting. And the reason why we felt like the demolition would not be possible was because of the historic nature of the building in the back. Can you just shed a little bit more light on
Sure.
that determination?
The lack of support for the building is not the historic nature, it's a building of this age, when having 2 units, is typically recognized as a rent-controlled structure.
Got it.
So we were not in support of the demolition of the 2 rent-controlled units.
Got it.
The project, as a 4-story building, and the project engineer can explain some of this, the code requirements and some of the type of construction and the need for roof access all come into play when you reach this 4 stories. Mm-hmm. Staff did see a 4-story structure with a large penthouse up top, stair penthouse, that we had design review concerns with. We came back to them with, we would like to see if there was this 3-story building that would be with a shaped roof. The project sponsor found that the cost benefit of the square footage of that roof and the construction of that extra floor did not meet their programmatic goals.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Moore, did you want to make a motion? Anybody want to make a motion? Commissioner Johnson.
Motion to approve with conditions. Is that right?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Richards.
No, I'm in full support. I like using the garage, which is actually a great idea. That's the typical way things were done. And so instead of a car there, you have an office there, and you still have your 2 units. So it looks like we're all winners.
Thank you.
Excellent. So, commissioners, we have a motion from Commissioner Johnson and with a second from Commissioner Richards. With that, Commissioner Fong.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards. Aye. And Vice President Melgar.
Aye.
So moved, 6-0. And we are now on to your discretionary review calendar. So item number 14, which is case number 2017-000433 DRP for 300 Darien Way, request for conditional use, discretionary review of building permit application, proposing to add habitable space at the basement, remodel the interior of the first floor, add attic dormers, add an open-air roof-only connection between the house and garage, and modify the garage door to the subject building.
Commissioners, Elizabeth Jonkier again of planning staff. This is an abbreviated DR for a project at 300 Darien Way. The project proposes to add habitable space at the basement, remodel the interior of the first floor level, add attic dormers, add also an open-air roof-only connection between the house and garage, and modify the garage door to appear as two doors. The project is located at the southeast corner of Darien Way and San Leandro Way within the RH1D zoning district and a 40X height and bulk district. The subject structure was constructed in 1924. The building is designed in the Storybook English cottage style by architect Harold Stoner and is located in the Balboa Park neighborhood of San Francisco and within the Cal Register eligible Balboa Terrace Historic District for the purposes of CEQA. The DR applicant is Emily Tam at 307 San Leandro Way, which is the adjacent corner neighbor. As of the date of this hearing, the department has received a petition and approximately 20 emails and letters in opposition to the project. A petition in support of the project was included in the project sponsor's response package. It also, I received one email after the packet distribution, which was sent to me on Tuesday, which I will pass forward to the Commission Secretary in support of the project. The project sponsor worked with preservation staff and the Residential Design Advisory Team to alter the original proposal, which at that time included construction of a one-story addition on the roof with new windows and a flat roof deck. Preservation staff found that the project posed a significant adverse impact to the historic resource and the district. Preservation staff worked with the project sponsor to revise the project in order to maintain the building's character-defining features and the property's status as a contributing resource. On March, as part of the lead-up to the DR hearing, the RDAT team reviewed the project and found it did not demonstrate an exceptional and extraordinary circumstance. RDAT noted that the proposed dormer windows reflect an appropriately scaled and subordinate expansion, well integrated with the existing roof form. The department supports the project and provides a recommendation to the Commission to not take DR and approve the project as proposed. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We will now hear from the DR requester. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Emily Tam, and I'm the DR requester. The project sponsors of 300 Darien Way held a pre-application meeting to build a second story to their home. Under our Balboa Terrace guidelines, they were supposed to notify 22 households, but only notified 5 neighbors. The Architecture Review Committee, Board of Directors, and City did not approve their plans. They revised their plans with the city and refused to show their plans to any neighbors and refused several times to hold a neighborhood meeting to discuss their project. I live right next door, and they have never contacted me about the revisions of their project. In January, the Board of Balboa Terrace votes to not approve their project. They are proposing to add these huge, massive dormers that do not match the surrounding homes. They are trying to squeeze in a second level to create 1,000 square feet of living space in the attic area and drastically changing the roof line. One of the dormers in the back of the home is approximately 30 feet by 7 feet, and it sticks out about 10 feet or more. They are opening 4 large windows, and they will be able to look directly into my bedroom. Do I need to turn on something?
I'll do SF Gov TV.
So this is the first exhibit where they are adding a 30 by 7, approximately 30 by 7 feet, huge, massive dormer to the back of their home. And this is how it currently looks right now. and it's going to stick out about 10 to 12 feet, so it won't match the surrounding homes at all. They use the example of 290 Darien Way, a home that is diagonally across Kitty Corner, as an example that has added a dormer. Almost 20 years ago, the owner added only one dormer that created an additional 50 to 100 square feet. This is originally a 2-story home over a basement. The part that's circled is where the dormer was added for 290 San Leandro. The dormer only added 50 to 100 square feet, which included a small bathroom and a walk-in closet. In the project sponsor's response to my DR application, they state that their home is in desperate need of repair, various aspects do not meet city code, and energy efficiency is incredibly low. The house is deteriorating. They stated they do not know the rental value of the property. Here it says, I attest that the above information is true to the best of my knowledge. It was signed by both Nathan and Marcia Ng. Since January 2017, for over a year and a half, they have 4 tenants living in the home, and according to their tenants, the approximate rental income per month is $5,000. In addition, the basement in the lower level is only about 6 feet high and has an unpermitted bedroom. Knowing that this is not up to code, the project sponsors are still renting out this bedroom to a tenant. The project sponsors have never lived in the home. Here's a picture of the tenant's dog. These pictures were taken approximately 2 days ago. Here's a picture of their tenant, Peter, that I chat with pretty often. Here's a picture of the tenant's cars during the day. A picture of the tenant's cars at night. And a picture of the lower level basement that's unpermitted and has a bedroom that's unpermitted that's currently being rented out. In their response to my DR application, they state that their home is 30 feet high. In the notice of the pre-application meeting, they stated that the height of their home is 25 feet and 1 inch because at that time they wanted to add another story that was about 10 feet. In the 311 notice...
Thank you. Your time is up.
I thought I had 5 minutes. It only says 3.
No, we had given you 5 minutes.
I'm sorry.
We had given you a full 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. But, you can come up,
For rebuttal?
For rebuttal.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you. Are there any speakers in support of the DR requester? Please come up.
Madam Chairman and Commissioners, good afternoon. My name is Bob Switzer, and I'm the current president of the Balboa Terrace Homes Association. 4 of our association's elected directors are also here today because the statutes that govern our association impose a fiduciary duty on directors to act in the best interest of our entire neighborhood. That's why we support action to accept the discretionary review for 300 Darien. Since the enactment of the Charter Amendment Proposition M and subsequent residential design standards, our board and your staff have had a special cooperative relationship on architectural standards. But today, our board must rely on your commission to uphold the special expectations created by Proposition M and the city design standards. That's why we support your acceptance of the discretionary review. Our board has opposed this project for some time in response to both the project's lack of merit, its inharmonious character, and a consistent pattern by the project sponsors, flouting our design standards, threatening, intimidating, discrediting our volunteers, even seeking to remove directors who oppose their project. You can imagine what validating that pattern of behavior will do to a community. We all acknowledge that the opposition to this project is not unanimous, but the opposition is broad-based, it's strong, and it's visible. Not only do you have petitions, letters, etc., but we also in the community have had 2 directors recalled by a special election, 3 directors reelected, not reelected by wide margins, and the common denominator was they supported this project. That's how controversial it is, Madam Chairman. The commissioners already know that what you do here today cannot be undone. But if your commission denies the discretionary review, denial would irrevocably destroy the defining architectural character of this English cottage-style home. It would no longer be financially feasible to restore it. It would undermine the work of good people in our neighborhood who play by the rules. And denial would encourage every flipper, every developer to flaunt our standards, threaten and intimidate and discredit our neighbors, and thumb their nose at our processes for resident participation. That's why we request that your commission accept the discretionary review, and we appreciate your action in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Robert Mann. I live at 445 Darien Way. I've been a neighbor there for 18 years. It's Balboa Terrace Homes Association. We're one of the oldest associations in the city. All properties are covered under deed restrictions, acknowledging the board's authority to safeguard and protect the value of the neighborhood. And we have architectural standards that have been in place since 2005. Everyone is very aware of them. And I wanted just to point out the process that we went through to make sure that the commission is fully aware. First of all, there was a neighborhood meeting. None of the notified neighbors came to the meeting for some reason. It was only the board. The community meeting was held election night, presidential election night, as polls were closing. However, we were able to get there. And before that meeting, the Neighborhood Architectural Committee was very clear that the first proposal for the second-story addition would probably never be approved by the city, and they should meet with us to talk about another plan before they hired an architect and developed full plans. Well, the Architectural Committee ended up writing a recommendation to Historic Planning that said that you should carefully, we didn't deny it, always said carefully consider the second floor addition, the change of the roof structure, the change of the windows, and the Historic Planning Group really found that everything we recommended was accurate. Nonetheless, the homeowners decided to retaliate against the Neighborhood Association by threatening a lawsuit, asking to remove me from the committee, Architectural Committee, and asking to remove another board member. The other board member was removed to appease the neighbors, and we descended into a period where there was no communication from the homeowners, no back and forth. We were not involved at all in the further negotiations on the second plan. And the board, as mentioned earlier, voted to say that we're going to deny approval on the project if story poles were not installed, and our architectural guidelines clearly state that, I can put it here if you want, story poles can be required. The homeowners said we will not put up story poles, nor will we have another community meeting to review the revised plans. At our insistence, we asked several times. And at this point, I hate to say this, but the homeowners have engaged in an attack on Ms. Tam and her mother. It's really descended into a terrible, terrible situation, and is extremely controversial. And I think it would be in the best interest to have the discretionary review approved and to enter into a period of looking at alternatives to some of the objections in the construction. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment in support of the DR requester?
Just begin and we'll
Off the page. Hello, good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Susan Grazioli. I have lived in Balboa Terrace over 40 years, and I actually live 150 feet for the notification center from this current home, 300 Darien Way. What I have right here now is a picture. Well, actually, this is the illustration that was done for the sale of the home, 307 San Leandro Way, the Emily Tam residence in question. It's right next door. That's what the house looked like originally. This is the house currently with the renovation that was completed over 10 years ago. My point being that this home was 10 years ago renovated, and I think it fell under completely different architectural guidelines and everything that we have now, because we are now a designated Balboa Terrace district, historic. So I wanted to show you the difference of this. Now,
So, sorry, ma'am,
pardon?
Are you speaking in support of the DR requester?
No,
Okay.
I am speaking for the DR requester in
Okay.
support of her, yes.
Okay.
I'm just giving a history of her project to give a little bit of historical relevance. And now this particular project, if you could show back that house, excuse me, can you, okay. That house was built 10 years ago, and that was the last house built in Balboa Terrace before we became a designated historic district. So that's the point, just to show you that. Now, today, if this project was to be put forth our board, we probably would not approve it. So I'm just saying, in 10 years' time, you know, you've got all the historic and all the different planning department. So I would just like to show that. I also have another point. This is the current dormer on the south side of the home. This is what they have now. I'm going to have to struggle with this because it's a little big. This is the proposed dormer, roughly 30 feet long, projects out 12 feet. You have two projecting dormers on the side, which to me, I do not think are classic style dormers. They more look like a barn that you see when you have a hay loft and you have to have the hay in and out. So I question the design. The overlap of the windows for the neighbor on the next side, the Tam's residence, and theirs, they're all going to have a lot of curtains or stained glass windows. I'm not sure, but it's going to be real cozy.
Okay.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comments in support of the DR requester?
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Kachigian. I've been a Balboa Terrace resident for 5 years. Before that, I lived in the Castro, where there are a number of historic Victorians, including my own, that's referenced in the Here Today book. I feed my family by practicing commercial finance law, but I feed my passions by architectural design and interior design. I'm very sensitive to what's going on in the neighborhood and the importance of the compatibility of the design. I think there are at least two reasons that the commission should accept the DR and deny the application at this point. First of all, the owner's failure to comply with the planning department requirements and the HOA design guidelines. There is substantial, overwhelming evidence that the project sponsors failed to notify all of the neighbors that were entitled to notification. Holding their neighborhood meeting on the night of a historic election, not a single reasonable person could believe that people would show up for a neighborhood meeting instead of sitting home and watching the election. I think the second independent reason for accepting the DR and denying the application at this point is the design's failure to comply with or to be compatible with the other architecture in the neighborhood. And with all due respect to Ms. Jonquier, who I know has done a great job in accepting all of the comments from folks. I do think that if you saw the project, if you were in the neighborhood, you would see that it is absolutely not compatible with the surrounding architecture, and that there are ways that the homeowners can get the additional square footage that they crave by excavating the basement area, which numerous homes in our neighborhood have done. I would respectfully request that you accept the DR and deny the application at this point.
Thank you. Any other public comments in support of the DR requester? Okay, so then we will hear from the project sponsor.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Marcia Ng, and I'm one of the project sponsors. My husband and I bought our home almost exactly 2 years ago. I have lived in Balboa Terrace with my family for over 18 years. After saving for many years, we were excited to be able to raise our family in the same great neighborhood I grew up in with my siblings. While we purchased the house primarily for the neighborhood and its proximity to my family, we also fell in love with the house itself. However, as you can see here, the house is deteriorating as the previous owners failed to maintain it properly. We decided to use this project to plan for our future family needs while also performing much needed repairs. Unfortunately, we have yet to spend a single night in our new home. While it has been quite a journey over the last 2 years, we know that the end result will be worth it because it will serve our family for the rest of our lives. My dear husband, Nathan, will now go over the many reasons we think our project should be approved as is.
Here are the pictures of our house as is, as the original plans, and our revised plans. Our historical preservation planner gave us 2 options to add square footage. One is to lift the house, 2 is to add dormers. Given the concerns previously expressed by the DR requester, we decided to have 0 height increase by not lifting our house and went only with dormers. The revised plans are only adding an exterior expansion of 383 square foot across 3 dormers, which is a 55% reduction compared to the original plans. However, the DR requester has repeatedly stated that she won't accept any exterior changes to our home. As a comparison, here is the DR's requester's own house before, during, and after the renovations. Her roughly 4,700 square feet house includes a height increase and an exterior expansion that is 2.5 times greater than ours. Our project is minor compared to hers. The DR requester claims that having dormers would be out of character in Balboa Terrace. There are many homes in Balboa Terrace that have dormers. The one on the left is 290 San Leandro, which is directly diagonal from our house. The one on the right is a Harold Stoner. Here are 2 more examples with dormers, and another 2 with dormers, and another 2 with dormers. Here are many more examples of homes throughout Balboa Terrace with dormers. Now, here are examples of Harold Stoner English-style homes throughout San Francisco that have dormers. It is clear that dormers are very characteristic of both Balboa Terrace and Harold Stoner homes. The DR requester claims that the dormers will block her sunlight. This is not true. Our house is to the north of hers, and based on the trajectory of the sun throughout the day, our dormers never come in between her house and the sun. The DR requester also claims that we did not notify neighbors nor the HOA about our plans throughout the process. They also state that we refused to meet with neighbors. Well, over the last 2 years, our house has gone through numerous neighborhood notifications and involvement. This includes personally talking and showing the architectural plans to over 100 neighbors individually through our own petition. We have a lot of support for our project. We have gotten 103 signatures from 69 homes. This represents 24% of all homes in Balboa Terrace. While the DR requester has a fair number of signatures opposing our project, we have reason to believe that they are not obtained in good faith. We spoke with some people who either signed a petition of opposition or were asked to sign but refused. They were told that we were house flippers, that our plans are incompatible with the store, or that we are not allowed to make changes. Even two neighbors who already signed their petition had never even heard about our project, so they were not even aware as to what they were signing. I would now like to read some excerpts of an email from 365 San Leandro. I met Emily's mother when she rang my doorbell. She stated that she was gathering a petition together because a neighbor was going to be applying for a permit to do work to the home down the block. She told me that they were going to raise the roof and do a lot more work than it was on the permit. I signed the petition based on the fact that she presented it as the only way to get more information. I have no problem with them doing work. In fact, it is nice for neighbors to improve the neighborhood. The homes at Balboa Terrace are older, and from what I can see from the plans, it would not take away from the character of the home. I would be fine with Nathan and Marcia's plans to do the work. This neighbor fully supported our project from the beginning, and yet he still signed the petition against our project. What does that say about other signers who may be slightly more neutral? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, are there any public comments in favor of the project sponsor?
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Tam, and I live at 301 Darien, which is directly across the street from 300 Darien Way at the same intersection. I happen to also be the daddy and daddy-in-law of the project sponsors. Of course, I'm a big supporter of this project because I want the best for my kids. My daughter has lived with me ever since we bought our house in 1999. Not only is she not moving far, she will only be living a few feet away from us. She and her husband saved for many years to be fortunate enough to purchase their home. Now, they just want to make some small changes to their house to fit their family for many more years. I did the same to my house almost 20 years ago without any issues from the HOA or the city. I was even able to make changes to the outside of my home and added an atrium that I enjoy very much to this day. Over the last decades, I have seen many other homes in the neighborhood go through major changes, including the DR requester's own home at 307 San Leandro Way. I think our home values have only increased with these improvements, and I think the city should continue to support them. In my opinion, the proposed changes are very small and go well with the character of the neighborhood. Please approve the project because my wife and I are directly affected if this project is not approved. The project sponsors are currently squatting at my house, and they will not leave until they can move into their own home after it is renovated. The longer this is delayed, the longer I have to continue supplying a roof over their heads. Please approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments in support of the project sponsors? Please come up.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kevin Bulavant, and I have lived in Balboa Terrace for 19 years. I am also a former director and treasurer of Balboa Terrace Homes Association. I am writing to provide full support of the 300 Darien Way remodel project as approved by the SF Planning Residential Design Advisory Team on March 23rd, 2018. Over 100 Balboa Terrace homeowners have signed a petition in support of the project. The scope and scale of the remodel project is consistent with the other homes on San Leandro Way and Darien Way, including the home of the discretionary review applicant, Miss Emily Tam, who resides next door to the 300 Darien Way project. Miss Tam's home was remodeled extensively, as you saw by the picture, in 2008, and approved by the BTHA Architect Review Committee, adding a second level that significantly increased the scale and mass of the structure. In fact, the BTHA Residential Design Guidelines, drafted in 2005, confirm that there is no predominant height level in Balboa Terrace based on a survey conducted in 1997. As a Balboa Terrace board member in 2016 and 2017, I can confirm that the property owners followed the design review process in the BTHA Residential Design Guidelines. They held a neighborhood meeting in November 2016 and engaged in numerous discussions with members of the BTHA Architectural Review Committee. The property owners revised their plans in response to input from the neighborhood, reducing the scale of the project as an accommodation. The current project plans do not increase the height of the current structure and simply adds a dormer to the attic. The BTHA Architectural Review Committee asserted that any changes to the roof, including addition of a dormer, would not be approved. The association's decision is unrealistic and inconsistent with the BTHA Residential Design Guidelines, which do not prohibit dormers in the neighborhood. And as Mr. Ng pointed out, many homes in the neighborhood have dormers. So I support the plans as approved by the planning department, and I think a statement from the environmental review sums it up nicely, that the project is a Class 1 minor alteration of an existing facility.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other public comment in support of the project sponsor? Please come up so we can keep it moving.
Hello, I'm Michael Schinner. I'm going to read a letter on behalf of Sophie Brawl, who's the former president of the Neighborhood Association. She couldn't be here today. This is a letter to Elizabeth Gordon-Jacquier. Hi, Elizabeth. I understand there's a DR hearing regarding 300 Darien on Thursday, July 19th. Currently, I'm undergoing chemotherapy and therefore may not be available for the hearing. I hope that you or someone can read my email at the hearing. I'm a neighbor to 300 Darien, and I live at 365 Santa Ana. I was the president of the Neighborhood Association when 300 Darien first attempted to redesign their house to suit their needs. As a young couple, their needs were to enlarge the house to fit a family. The couple was married last year at a ceremony at their parents' home across the street from 300 Darien. As the president of the association, I heard troubling comments about the owners of 300 Darien. I heard they were, quote, flippers, and that they were brother and sister, and they did not want to live in the neighborhood. Most of the comments stem from their neighbor, Emily Tam, who lives on San Leandro and is the secretary of the Neighborhood Association. I am happy to have such a lovely young couple in our neighborhood. I am flabbergasted that our Neighborhood Association would demean the couple and do everything in their power to block a well-thought-out upgrade to the home at 300 Darien. Both my husband and I have looked at the plans for 300 Darien, and we feel that the plans are well-designed and take into account the beauty of our neighborhood. I hope that the hearing will be the end to a long opposition to the upgrade for 300 Darien. Fondly, Sophia Brawl. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment?
Hi, Laura Clark, YIMBY Action. This is why I joke that DRs are the "we're never having a block party ever again" hearing. They bring out the worst in us. They pit neighbor against neighbor in this very destructive and hostile way that is sad and disappointing. The Homeowners Association came out here and told you their agenda pretty clearly. They said that their mission is to preserve the value of the neighborhood. The fiduciary interest of the entire neighborhood was what they said. In other words, they are here because they want high property values. And we maybe shouldn't take that into account in our public policy making. The interests of a homeowners association are not the same as the interests of the people. We need more housing. This is all zoned single family home only. It is on Zillow, or I guess I was looking at Redfin, declared very walkable with excellent transit. There is no reason that this shouldn't be upzoned to allow a 4-unit building at the very least. And now we're debating whether dormers are in context or out of context, while the next door neighbor managed to expand their home and then wanted to pull the ladder up behind her so that the next family along couldn't have a house that would work for them. This is really silly and hostile and should not be the way that we make policy. This is why planners quit. This is why the planning department is constantly losing qualified people, because they cannot handle this. This is the worst that our city has to offer. And you all have the ability to say, we're not going to do this anymore. You all have the ability to say no more on these kinds of nasty retaliatory DRs of neighbor against neighbor. The rules should be the rules. If you follow the rules, you get your permits. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want them to waste your time. I don't want to listen to who signed whose petition and whether it was in good faith or bad. The rules should be the rules. We cannot lose any more planners to these kinds of hostile processes. So I hope that you will do what the rules say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments in support of the project sponsor? Okay. With that, the DR requester, you get a 2-minute rebuttal.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I just wanted to point out that Sophie Brielle and Kevin Boulevant were both recalled for self-dealing, and that was in December 2017, and they're both supporting this controversial 300 Darien Way project. And in the notice for the 311, it fails to mention that the huge, massive dormer and addition of 4 large windows at the back of the home, it does not mention that at all. It just mentions they're adding 2 dormers, and that's it. This is extremely misleading for neighbors. It's just an example of how not transparent these project sponsors are and how dishonest they are. In their response to my DR application, they state that their home is 30 feet in height. In the notice of the pre-app meeting, they stated that the height of their home is 25 feet and 1 inch, because at that time they wanted to add another story, about 10 feet or so. In the 311 notice, they stated that the height is 29 feet and 7 inches, and there was no change. At this point, because of all of these inconsistencies, we really do not know the real height of their home. They also, I made copies of an email and an article that is extremely one-sided that they circulated around the neighborhood 2 days ago, criticizing the DR process, and it's just completely misleading, and I made copies. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Project sponsor, you have a 2-minute rebuttal. Project sponsor. Okay, you don't have to take the 2 minutes if you don't want to, but.
Hi, I'm the architect. You know, on the dormers, you know, we've got obscure glass, you know, so just to, you know, try to create a, you know, a privacy barrier between the neighbors and ourselves. Do you have any technical questions about the
The commissioners may have some
design?
questions, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
So I guess, question for staff. Balboa Terrace is one of the few neighborhoods that has its own design guidelines. Okay, were those design guidelines put in place before the historic district was established, the historic eligible district was identified?
I believe that we identified the district in 2011.
Okay, and the design guidelines are how old? 2005, okay. 2000, so they happened before. So what is the overlap between historic guidelines and the design guidelines for Balboa Terrace? Because I'm trying to understand, they took the department's suggestion that they add dormers or raise the building.
Right.
Right. So in 2005, were these dormers allowed based on the site, the positioning, the length? And if you now put that into a context of a historic district, are these too large? I think that's my question.
They were determined not to be too large through the environmental review process and our review based on looking at the Secretary's standards, the
Okay.
preservation planner that looked through this project and had numerous discussions with the project sponsor and requested alterations.
Okay. I mean, I agree with Laura Clark here. You know, we hate seeing these kinds of neighbor on neighbor things and who said this and who said that in my petition. And you know, we're really looking at what's before us, and what's before us is a project that adds dormers. Does it meet the design guidelines, or does it meet the Secretary of Interior standards? And the answer I got was yes. So I'll wait for some other commissioners, but I'm leaning towards accepting the project as is.
Commissioner Moore.
I'd like to ask the city attorney. We, as a commission, are interested in established neighborhood guidelines. However, when staff evaluates them, they do have to come in balance with the rest of neighborhood considerations. Is that correct? I can't
Can you
hear
turn on the mic?
Neighborhood guidelines don't trump other considerations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I think that is an important thing. I think neighborhood guidelines are augmented or augment residential guidelines, and I think we are all sensitive to them. However, when staff looks at the project together with historic preservation, I think they are giving us a reading that indeed they made corrections and amendments to the project, and I think that is what's in front of us. I regret that the neighborhood is as divided on the subject matter. We often have that, but in the end, I do personally not see anything disruptive or disturbing about where the dormers are, the size of the windows. The dormers are on the side. They're not affecting the facade, and actually when the pictures were shown of other dormers in the neighborhood, I think they actually added a certain kind of richness and variation to the appearance of the neighborhood. So I did not find what was here in front of me negative or distracting, and I have to support staff in its recommendation to not take DR and approve the project as is.
Second.
Commissioner Koppel. Oh, okay. There's a motion and a second.
Yeah, okay. So we will call the question. So there was a motion from Commissioner Moore and a second by Commissioner Richards. With that motion to not take DR and approve the project as proposed, Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Vice President Melgar?
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 6-0. So commissioners, we will move on to your final item on your calendar, which is the item number 15, case number 2018-004675 DRP-02 for the property at 310 Montcalm Street, which is a request for discretionary review of a project proposing removal of unpermitted rear addition, reduction of dormers, and restoration of a facade to bring the building back into compliance per a planning enforcement case.
Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Sucre, what's the, so there's a request for a continuance?
Correct. So staff
Sorry,
might be able
You can
to.
say it, but I just want to understand procedurally then what
Sure.
happens.
In this instance, the project sponsor requested a continuance, and the staff might be able to elaborate a little bit more. However, the DR requester is not supportive of the continuance, and neither is the department.
Okay.
So
So
you can
we'll hear it, and if people want to continue it, we can do that after we hear it.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Alexandra Kirby with Department Staff. The item before you is a request for discretionary review of a building permit seeking to bring the subject building at 310 Montcalm Street into compliance with the Planning Code. The property is located on the north side of Montcalm Street between Alabama Street and Peralta Boulevard within an RH1 zoning district in the Bernal Heights neighborhood. The subject building is a two-story single-family dwelling that was originally constructed circa 1900. The proposed scope of work is to construct 3 dormers at the roof to provide additional habitable space at the attic level, to remove an unpermitted rear bump out and reconstruct a code-compliant rear addition projecting approximately 4 feet to the rear, and to permit a screened parking space at the side setback. The total habitable interior space would not be increased from the existing square footage. This project was originally brought to staff as an enforcement case relating to unpermitted exterior alterations, including significant additional massing at the roof level that exceeded the approved scope of work for new dormers, as seen in the exhibits. Staff coordinated with the prior architect and DBI inspectors from April through October 2017 to get an adequate permit set filed for the abatement of the violation. After exhausting all avenues of the department's enforcement procedures in November of 2017, the project was referred to the city attorney's office by the zoning administrator in conjunction with 6 other properties owned by the same property owner that were concurrently in varying stage of enforcement with the planning department. The department's enforcement process has continued to run in tandem with this investigation on all properties, and a penalty of $10,000 was paid by the owner in November of 2017. A fully compliant set of plans was submitted by the new architect to staff on January 16th, 2018, which is before the commission today. The requests for discretionary review were filed by Marianne Bockers of 312 Montcalm and Susan Thackeray of 308 Montcalm. They've requested that the proposed dormers and parking space be removed from the scope of work, in addition to remediation of all damages to adjacent properties. Staff has reviewed the proposal with the Residential Design Advisory Team and concluded that the dormers comply with our standard recommendations for dormers as well as the Secretary of Interior standards for preservation purposes, and that the proposed parking space appears to have been in place prior to current ownership due to an existing curb cut. As such, staff recommends approval of the design of the project as they're in conformance with the planning code and applicable guidelines. In regards to damages incurred by both adjacent properties, there's no viable planning mechanism that would require the property owner to seek permits on separate assessor's lots. Yesterday, the commission was sent a letter from Supervisor Hillary Ronan expressing support for discretionary review and a condition that would allow for enforceable protections of the adjacent properties. One neighbor at 311 Montcalm has additionally expressed support for taking discretionary review, and you received these this afternoon. The department recommends the commission not take discretionary review and approve the project as proposed to allow for abatement of the violation. I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a requester?
DR requester, you have
Thank
a
you.
5-minute presentation.
Thank you.
Pleasure time.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Marianne Bockers. I live at 312 Montcalm Street with my husband, Rafael Trujillo, who is a third-generation San Franciscan. We live immediately downhill from this project. The project has been extremely painful. It's been fraught with difficulties, and it has forced us to spend our hard-earned money that we save for retirement to protect our homes and ourselves from this developer. We reached out to Mr. Gujral from the moment this project started and attempted to negotiate and work out problems that existed with 310 Montcalm, flooding water into our home. As a result, all that we have experienced is our trust has been abused and our goodwill has been abused at every turn. Now, let's turn to the actual discretionary review factors. The only information that you have in front of you from Mr. Gujral involves the actual plans that they have submitted. Mr. Gujral has not filed any response to our discretionary review materials, and he's not here today either. And I understand that it's virtually unprecedented for a project sponsor not to respond to a discretionary review application. This kind of behavior has been common to us on this project. Now let's look at the factors that support discretionary review. In fact, this project, as we see it, these are the tiny houses. This is our house, and the other house, 310, is right next door. And what they want to do is lift the roof, create batwing dormers, put another dormer in the front, like a nose dormer, that is actually going to dwarf our little cottage right next door. They also want to put a car right here, which is right next to our downstairs bedroom window, which implicates privacy and health and safety concerns for us. Now, let's look at the actual project, the project history. There have been rampant, consistent, and flagrant permit violations throughout. There was a homeless encampment there. People were defecating inside this property. They were shooting up drugs. They came over to our house and started using it as a toilet. Plus, the construction that has occurred there already does not reflect the plans that Mr. Gujral originally provided to the city. Mr. Gujral breached the contracts that he signed with us. He breached them, and this shows that he was not willing to stand behind his own legal obligations. The property has been declared a nuisance by the city. And Mr. Gujral, in February of 2017, added this unpermitted third floor to this property. When this happened, I was just aghast. I went next door and I talked to the contractor, and I said, "What are you doing over here? How can you put this third floor up here? This isn't part of the plans." And he turned to me and he said, "I'm just doing what I was told to do." So I've pondered this. What has happened here? Does Mr. Gujral have two sets of plans? Does he have a set of plans that he gives to the city and another one that he gives to the workers? I don't know, but that's something that you might want to look into. Now, other reasons that you ought to grant discretionary review include Mr. Gujral's past, his history. Mr. Gujral has an admitted and documented history of real estate misconduct. He voluntarily surrendered his real estate sales and brokerage license to the state of California after multiple charges of misconduct were made against him by the state in connection with those licenses. He admitted all the factual allegations made against him, and the actual charges involved fraud, mismanagement of funds, negligence, and incompetence. Additionally, there have been multiple multi-million-dollar civil lawsuits filed against Mr. Gujral since the end of 2016 for his finished projects, which are alleged to have serious major defects. Then we have the city attorney lawsuit, which I'm sure you're aware of, which includes Mr. Gujral's project next door. All of this information shows that what happened at 310 Montcalm was not a mistake, and it wasn't an isolated incident. There is a pattern and practice here, which we are asking you to stop. Please, please put this house back in its original footprint. Please get rid of the dormers. Don't let them put the parking spot right next to our bedroom. And what you have to understand is any representations made by his representatives are not reliable, because Mr. Goodrell has shown that he will do whatever he wants.
So your time is up.
Yes.
So we have 5 minutes for the second DR requester.
Thank you very much.
My name is Susan Thackeray. I and my husband, Stephen Anker, live and own the property at 308 Montcalm Street, abutting the 310 Montcalm property. I'm a fourth-generation Californian. One of my great-grandfathers was a signatory of the California Constitution. We have owned and lived in our home for 25 years, and our roots go deep. For the last 2.5 years, we have spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to protect our home, using up the money that we had saved for long-cherished renovations of our home as we move toward retirement. Here is a brief description of what we have endured in these 2.5 years. I want to be very clear that we have worked hard to come to agreement with Goodrell. Neither we, nor our consultant, nor our lawyers knew that we were dealing with someone who seemingly had no actual interest in coming to agreement, but only an interest manifested by his actions to profit as highly as possible. If he had adhered to the original plans, there would be no problem here today. Starting in February 2016, problems arose involving 310's drainage into the electrical system of our garage. 4 months to get this repaired, just the beginning. Poorly secured scaffolding broke loose, continuously threatening our wiring and structure. As described by my neighbors, homeless occupation followed. April 2016, we saw that the interior of the building had been gutted. The list goes on and on. Abatement by DBI in August 2016. After that, we went through the expensive time and energy draining process to put together an underpinning and license agreement to protect our home. Signed by Goodrell on November 4th. A few weeks later, on Thanksgiving weekend, a crew came in without permit, without notification, and poured an unpermitted foundation directly contrary to this agreement, jeopardizing our home. We then, again at great expense, filed with our neighbors suit against Goodrell and his LLC on December 20th. By December 27th, while I was ill and helping to care for my seriously ill sister, we were asked to quickly hammer out another agreement to remediate the situation caused by Goodrell's flaunting of the original underpinning and license agreement. This was signed by Goodrell on December 27th, never fulfilled. February 2017, Goodrell built an entire unpermitted third floor abutting our home. Planning inspected in 2017, and notices of enforcement and penalty followed. In April and May of this year, they approached us to put together yet another agreement. This document, somehow they forgot after it was made until 2 days before we had to file for DR. The issue here is not whether the current architectural plans submitted are adequate. The issue is that Ashok Goodrell has never adhered to the prior plans he has submitted or to the permits he received. Those very plans have not been worth anything. Goodrell's current request for permits based on plans that seem adequate must be seen in the light of the exceptional circumstances I've described. Goodrell abrogated and violated every permit, contract, and every plan in the history of this project. His repeated actions have endangered our property, our house, our health and safety. His actions have interfered in my work life and my right not to live and feel endangered. And quite frankly, I'm worn out by this. Because of these exceptional circumstances, we are asking that this permit application go to discretionary review. We ask that the permit be issued only as it makes the terms and conditions of the prior underpinning agreement and licensing agreements, to which Mr. Gujral has already agreed, the minimal conditions for such a permit. And we ask that any work done under permit on 310 Montcalm be done with continuing mandated supervision, since Ashok Gujral has, in regard to our property at 308 Montcalm, never fulfilled any obligation or responsibility either to the City of San Francisco and its agencies, to the terms of legal documents signed by himself, or to the tenants, values, and ethics of this community that we all share. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, is there any public comment in support of the DR requesters?
Hi, I'm Georgia Shudish. I really try to make it an unwritten rule for myself to not comment on anything outside of Noe Valley. But I'm breaking that rule today. I think that you should take DR. I think the key word here is footprint. Going back to the original footprint, as mentioned, is the best thing that you could do here. And why do I say that? Well, because all that unpermitted work could easily be taken away quickly. And what should happen there is what should happen originally, which is the house, which is a very nice house, could have just been fixed up, spiffed up, modernized, marketed quickly. They could have a nice neighbor now. All this could have been avoided except for one of the 7 deadly sins, which is greed. So I urge you to go back to the footprint. That's a good plan to do. It would never have come here. It would have just been an over-the-counter thing, I believe, if they had done something to spiff up the house and keep it in the original footprint and get it onto the market as soon as possible, provide housing that everyone says is so desperately needed, and probably would have been relatively affordable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Terry Milne. I'm a member of the Bernal Heights East Slope Design Review Board. And I'm here, I guess, supporting the previous speaker that you had. And I'd like to know, maybe from planning, about the agenda item that I'm looking at, which is a permit that was issued a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago. That doesn't have anything to do with the previous owner or the things that were done to the house in the past 3 years. I mean, what about the new permit? It seems like that intent is, as the previous speaker said, return it to the original footprint and take away some of this embellishment and extra floors. And it seems like that would be a really good idea for this block. And is that what the permit number on the agenda is? I'd like to know.
Thank you. Any other public comment in support of the DR requesters? Okay, with that, we, I guess, don't have the project sponsor. Or do we do? Okay, there we go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ryan Patterson on behalf of the project sponsor. I want to start by saying I understand the neighbors' anger and their frustration here. I was involved at the end of 2016 in negotiating and drafting the agreement to resolve the problems that had arisen back then between the DR requesters and their attorney. Concluded that agreement in November 2016. And very regrettably, the contractor began pouring foundation in deviation with what we had agreed to. I was pulled back in a month later to negotiate and finalize a fix to that agreement, an addendum that gave them protections and payment. Concluded that, I believe, on Christmas Day, sitting out Christmas dinner with my family for part of that time, because I wanted to get this solved for the neighbors' benefit and to bring peace to this project. I had no involvement with the project or property since then, and am very disappointed to see that this is still going on and that there have been some serious problems here. So last week, I was asked to come and try to bring some kind of closure and resolution to this, and that's why I'm here, because I would like to help, and I'm going to ask for your instructions and what you would like, if there's something I can do to try to resolve this. This project, as hopefully you know, has a completely new team. The previous architect is no longer on this. The project has not been under construction in quite some time. There is a new architect, and I've, as I said, been brought in about a week ago. Also, very significantly, this property is now for sale. Because of what has happened here, because of the city attorney's complaint, the owner is selling the property at a loss, significant loss, to a new buyer. Escrow has been opened. I understand financing has been arranged. Sale has not been completed, and I understand that may depend on what happens here. My suggestion is that the new buyer would probably be a better person to be talking with the neighbors and resolving their concerns. They've obviously had a very difficult time working with the current owner over these past years with their concerns. I had a conversation with the DR requester's consultant last week. My understanding was that he was arranging a meeting between the new buyer and their team and the DR requesters to talk about their requests and how to resolve this. I understand from the DR requesters today that apparently that was never communicated to them, which is problematic and disappointing for me, because now we arrive here and they're surprised that we were trying to set up a meeting. But that's what should happen. That's what I would like to have happen. We would like a continuance so that the buyer can take over this property and handle that. I think that's in everyone's interest. I understand they want closure today. And if that's the case, what we can offer is, as they've requested on page 3 of your packet, if I can have the overhead, please. The DR requesters have made 3 requests that are germane to the planning process. The 4th request in their DR applications was for a legal agreement with the owner. So these 3 requests we are prepared to accept. The requests are to remove the proposed parking space, which I understand is historic with a perhaps 100-year-old curb cut. Number 2 is to remove the front dormer. And number 3 is to remove the rear dormers. I think that the permit that's before you today, which has, as I understand it, been imposed on the owner by the planning department as part of this enforcement process, already scales back the footprint substantially from where it was at the time of purchase. So these concessions would be, in addition to that, giving up quite a bit of space and obviously value in the project. If there is something else that you think would help resolve this, I'm all ears. I would like to resolve it. I would like to meet with these neighbors. I think they should also meet with the buyer. And this is supported by, this permit is, as I understand it, supported by the Slope Design Review Board, as Mr. Milne spoke a moment ago. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I would like to show briefly, maybe I need to do it during rebuttal, pre-existing photo.
That exceeds your time.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Are there any public commenters in support of the project sponsor? Okay, with that, the DR requesters get how many minutes each?
2.
There's 2 minutes each. Come on up, please.
Can we see this?
Yep, just start talking and they'll... Just start talking and they'll...
Pardon me?
Start talking, and yeah,
Okay,
it's
I'm
up,
sorry.
it's up, yeah.
First of all, let's see. The allegation that a foundation was just poured by the contractor suggests that this was a one-off. Well, in fact, as this document shows, The contractor who did this was Stay Covered Builders, and he is a contractor on multiple projects owned by Mr. Goodrell, all of which are part of the city attorney's lawsuit. So that was not just an isolated incident, as Mr. Patterson seemed to represent. Secondly, Mr. Patterson apparently contacted our expert, not us. Ms. Thackeray and I are the people who are listed on the DR application. He should have contacted us. Not only is it inappropriate, but it's also sexist. There should not be any continuance here. This is the day, this is the time, and as I told you in my papers, there was going to be a last-minute maneuver to try and gain a tactical advantage here. That's what's happened all throughout this project. That's what Mr. Patterson tried to do again here. No, this is the day of reckoning for this project. Please do as we've asked. I'm telling you, the words of Mr. Goodrell's representatives are worthless because he does whatever he wants. You have to enforce this. Whatever his representatives say is not what he does. Time and time again, he has shown that. Please do as we have requested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Thackeray?
We've never received any letters of notification from Mr. Patterson that there was going to be this kind of a, I suppose, defense. And I only want to say, really, that until there's an actual bill of sale, which there is not, we have been through this kind of maneuver time and time again, as I hope I made clear, and things aren't what they seem until there is a guarantee that the work is going to be done in the way it's said it's going to be done. Saying there's a sale pending should not affect this request for DR until there's a bill of sale and we know with whom we're dealing. We cannot let go of the request for the DR. It doesn't make sense given our prior experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Project sponsors rebuttal.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I did speak with the consultant for the neighbors who's referred to throughout their DR paperwork when I was brought into this last week. He was familiar with the buyers coming in, thought it was a good idea to have this meeting, and requested a continuance. He, I understand, conveyed that to his clients who denied the continuance. I told him I would make that request to you, which I did. There's nothing sexist about that. My practice is to work with the consultants or attorneys on the case. The request that the DR requesters are bringing beyond what their initial request was, including to tear out the foundations that were poured, I would just caution the commission, you should consult with an engineer before ordering that. I think, thank you. That could be highly problematic. The foundations are supporting the neighbors' properties right now. So I suggest speaking with a qualified geotechnical and structural engineer. I do want to show photos briefly on the overhead. This is essentially the pre-existing envelope of the property. This is subject site here, uphill DR and downhill DR. And here you can see the upper level. This is what was done. So these dormers here. And this is what's being proposed in the current permit, as supported by and in some ways forced by planning. We're willing to give up these dormers if you choose, but I understand planning has found this to be consistent with standards and advisable. The parking space that's slated to go here, we're happy to put in the screening that they requested and if necessary, remove them. Thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Richards, did you want to go first?
So I'm the only one on the roll. And the case we had last week, 214 States, is fresh in my mind, and I think this commission actually put its foot down with regard to this kind of behavior. the fact that there's a new team or a new buyer really doesn't obviate the need to actually address what's in front of us. That's speculation. Whether the sale goes through or not, it's not a concern to me. I guess the question I have for the DR requesters are, before the house was sold in November of 2015, did the existing house have any problems, i.e. drainage, flooding, with your house? Please respond.
Yeah, Commissioner Richards, it's a very good question. The prior owner of the house was Jesse Garcia, who died in his 80s. And, we've lived at this property, between us 25 and almost 30 years.
Sure.
We had a great relationship with Jesse.
Sure.
And so there were problems because he was elderly. The house, it floods into, it's engineered such as the water would flood from his house right into our downstairs.
Okay.
And so we tried to figure out ways between us to deal with these drainage issues. And what we did when the buyers showed up is we said, look, there's these massive drainage problems. We have to address these. That's how all of this started. So yes, it did exist. We did remedial efforts with our prior neighbor before his death. And then this is what we brought to Mr. Gujral and Mr. Waldman. And I want to correct a statement that Mr. Patterson has made here. The contractor who's been a part of this project from the beginning, Mark Waldman, is still a part of this. And he was involved in these negotiations up until a few months ago. So, it's not clear that there's a new
Sure.
team here.
So new team, I mean, new buyer, new team, I
Yes,
think architect.
I understand.
So
Thank
the
you.
question I have is, was there anything that's done to the house currently, i.e. the new foundation, that prevented any of these problems that you had prior to the new owner taking over? So you had drainage problems, a new foundation was poured. Was there still water coming in?
Well, let's see. Yes, this is my husband.
We have a brand new foundation on that side of the house. Okay, we finally had to install a new foundation. So at this point, this is the first season. So as the first season, it's good. Okay, I don't know what's going to happen next year.
Sure.
Okay,
Well, the other thing is that they've erected, in the process of working on the house, they put up an unfooted concrete barrier and then a fence above it. So we don't know. I mean, they have done nothing to remediate it. The plans don't include that remediation.
Okay.
That's been part of our problem all the way along.
Okay.
I think they tried to do something about it, but we can't. Part of the agreement that we had entered into was to try to monitor that situation, to validate it, and that was unable to happen because of the blitzkrieg that happened of the pouring of this foundation on the Thanksgiving weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's behind
Thank you.
In regard to my property, no, there were no cross-property problems involved between myself, my husband, and Jesse Garcia. They did not exist.
Okay. Again, I'm coming back to what we did last week with 214 states. I know Commissioner Fong wasn't here. I think with the established pattern of abuse of the permit process, the legal system, and the neighbors, I think doing anything differently than we did last week would be condoning this kind of behavior. So, I'm traveling towards what we did on 214 states last week, which is put the house back the way it was before all this illegal work was done, make sure that it's code complying and habitable so it gets a CFC, and then let the new owner start fresh and negotiate with the neighbors on what they want to do to improve the property. That's where I'm headed.
Commissioner Koppel.
Yeah, this is a complete kind of flashback from last week, and I wanted to make a couple points, repeating myself from last week, but a couple of the commissioners weren't here, and I kind of dawned on something that kind of clarified a lot of things for me. So I've spent almost a couple decades working in my industry, construction industry, and I spent about 14 years out in the field working with the tools, and then also estimating and project managing. And if I learned one thing in those years, it was that the blueprints are the absolute Bible. You do not ever install more work or do more work than are on the prints because you're not getting paid to do it. So whether you have the tools or whether you're in the office telling your guys in the field what to do, you never, ever exceed the scope because you're not getting paid for it. And so we're not ever showing up here with our minds made up trying to penalize, enforce violations, but there comes a point in time when it's obvious that the owner has literally directed people to do so. And I see the architects, the design team, and I understand they're a local company and they're not to blame for this. It's the owner. Mm-hmm. And so like we did last week, we almost have no other choice but to follow through with something similar to what we did 7 days ago.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to completely agree with my fellow commissioners. I think in looking at the history of this property, it's clear without a doubt, the owner and all associated parties knew what they were doing, and that the fault really does lie with the owner. And, ultimately, I think just looking again, even at the listing of this property when it was bought, there was the potential here to, as Ms. Shudish said, make a great home that a family could live in. But it's clear that was never the intent. And so I would fully support taking this house back to its original footprint before any other action is moved forward.
Commissioner Moore.
Except for a different address, I think this particular hearing sounds like 214 State Street. The only person who is missing is Mr. O'Riordan. However, the evidence that was presented in short form here clearly speaks to the very same type of omissions that we heard at that time. And I could not agree more with what my fellow commissioners have said, that I believe in order to be consistent and really send the correct message, that we need to stand strongly with a similar decision that we made last week.
Commissioner Richards.
So I move to take DR and instruct the owner to put the house back exactly as it was before November 6, 2015. It has to be absolutely code complying and habitable, so it would need a certificate of final completion and occupancy. And I think that's the right answer here.
Second. Did you want to say something?
Just for some clarification, so the rear bump out of the property was both non-conforming and not permitted previously, the existing conditions at the time of the sale to Mr. Gujral. So the current footprint of the actual bump out as shown on the plans right now reflects a code compliant element of the building that was previously there. They're retaining some of the walls. I understand there was a lot of dry rot at that portion. So I just wanted to clarify if that can be retained. And then I assume we're speaking about preserving the envelope of the building. So the roof line, no dormers. I just want to make sure that our report's really clear.
No dormers. I mean, there's extensive record. It was listed by Schemmer and Andener from Barbagletta Real Estate, MLS number 437572. I'm sure there are plans that exist prior to Mr. Gujral taking over. I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel. We are asking to take the building back. There was unpermitted work prior to Mr. Gujral purchasing the building, which resulted in some non-code complying bump outs in the back. To me, exactly means exactly, and I don't want to penalize Mr. Gujral. It is what it is. If it's not complying, I guess the zoning administrator would have to rule on that.
They would be required to obtain a variance to legalize the replacement of the non-compliant portion of the building, which they took down without benefit of permit.
So it's already gone.
Yes, that's my understanding. So they didn't have a permit to remove the non-compliant portion at the rear of the building. They removed that. They have lost that under
so they have to,
the code.
So I would then recommend that we just, if it's down, it's gone. It's gone.
They're not allowed to restore any non-compliant portions of the building.
Yeah.
And could we also have clarification as to the parking? I think the curb cut had been existing for some time. I think the plans don't show an existing parking spot. But what is the commission's desire as to the parking that they?
If it was historic and it was there, if there's a curb cut, it indicates there's an ability to pull a car in and out. I mean,
there's a curb cut, but as to whether that was actually functional, I don't know if the neighbors could speak to whether it had been actively used as parking.
Mr. Trujillo.
That particular, we have the same similar type of situations on our property that's right next to it. And so we've never been able to use that as a carport. Jesse never used that as a carport. That was originally, these are 1880s or so type of cottages. There was a pathway actually to the back where the carriages and the horses would go. There's a trough that my neighbor has next door. So this was never used as an automobile.
I mean, I had the real estate listing here. I don't believe that it said it had a garage or a parking space. When it was sold in it didn't. I don't believe that it showed a parking space.
Right. Yeah. There was never one. That was the entrance to the lower unit where.
Right, and it's a bedroom. So I would just omit that as well.
Okay.
No parking space.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm confused. Commissioner Johnson, did you have a further comment, or Commissioner Moore?
No,
Okay.
just the names are up, sorry.
Okay, so I will just say that I am actually very happy that the city attorney is finally dealing with a serial offender. I think that this is the kind of stuff that exacerbates our housing shortage. This is an egregious case. I also think it's particularly just ridiculous to blame the workers, blame the contractors who are, helping you make an outrageous profit. But so with that, is everything clear?
I just want to make sure we have everything clear, and so I'll ask staff to repeat back my understanding of the commission's motion.
Okay, so we have a motion to retain the proposed footprint of the building, and it just came to my attention that that was removed due to a notice of correction from DBI. So I wanted to make sure that that remains in place, that we wouldn't want them to restore the...
No.
I mean, the house existed before, except for the bump out, which was conforming. The bump out was which was non-conforming. I'm sorry. So the bump out's gone. So they would build the back of the building within the required rear yard, and construct the house back as it was with the peaked roof. Everything the same. Hopefully, new shingles, new paint job. CFCO has to be habitable. Can't be a sham reconstruction. Somebody could move in tomorrow once it's completed, and no parking space.
Okay.
What is it?
Not.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're done. Thank you.
So we're going to call the question now. So on the motion to take DR.
One second. Our staff planner used the word proposed footprint, and I think what you are saying is you want to go back to the original.
Yeah, November 5th, 2015, what it was on November 5th.
Yeah, so they would need
Except
to...
the bump out.
Okay.
Except the bump out.
Sorry, I keep...
Okay, so and to clarify for the record too, so it seems, based upon information here from the applicant, that they had received a correction notice from Department of Building Inspection related to the structure at the rear. And we can look into this further, but in any event, the structure was removed and there's no permit for that. But in any event, to replace it, they would need a variance anyway. But I'm hearing the commission, kind of considering all these facts, would like it to be in the current compliant configuration.
Current compliant.
Would not like any non-compliant portions of the building to be reconstructed.
Correct. Thank you very much. No parking space, and CF has to be habitable. CFCO has to be issued. That everything's up to code.
Okay. So on that motion, which was recommended by Commissioner Richards and seconded by Commissioner Melgar, Commissioner Fong?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
And Vice President Melgar?
Aye.
So moved. That motion passes to take DR 6-0. And that was our last agenda item.
Meeting's adjourned.